Wedding. 40 AC. Winterfell Godswood. Third person POV. The heart of Winterfell's Godswood was hushed, the ancient weirwood tree standing sentinel over the assembled lords of the north. A light dusting of snow shimmered on its pale bark and the surrounding evergreens, lending a serene beauty to the winter scene. The lords of Winterfell, their faces solemn and expectant, stood in a semicircle, their banners furled against the cold. Before the heart tree stood Lord Torrhen Stark, his weathered face etched with a mixture of pride and solemnity. He would officiate the ancient rites that would bind his grandson to his chosen bride. Beside him stood Theon Stark, his usual calm demeanor tinged with a barely perceptible air of nervous anticipation. He was dressed in stark grey cloak, the dire wolf sigil of his house embroidered in silver thread upon his chest. His gaze was fixed on the path leading into the Godswood, waiting for the woman who had captured the heart of the mighty wolf to arrive. The only sound was the gentle whisper of the wind through the branches, carrying the weight of tradition and the promise of a new beginning for House Stark. A hush fell over the assembled lords as figures emerged from the snow-dusted path leading into the Godswood. First came Lord Theon Mormont, a stern-faced man with the rugged bearing of Bear Island, his dark green cloak trimmed with grey fur. Beside him walked his daughter, Diana Mormont. She wore a gown of deep forest green velvet that seemed to absorb the muted light of the Godswood, its simple cut emphasizing her strong, graceful form. A cloak of light grey wool, fastened at her shoulder with a clasp shaped like a fierce bear's head, billowed slightly behind her as she moved. Her dark brown hair was braided, and her green eyes, the color of emeralds, were fixed on Theon. She moved with a quiet confidence, the very air around her seeming to carry the untamed spirit of Bear Island. Lord Theomore's hand rested lightly on her arm as they approached the heart tree, ready to present her to her future husband. Lord Torrhen Stark raised his hands, his voice, though aged, still carrying a resonant authority that silenced the gentle rustling of the wind. Who comes before the old gods this night? Theon Mormont stepped forward, his stern face softened by the solemnity of the occasion. Diana, of the House Mormont, comes here to be wed. A woman grown, trueborn, and noble. She comes to beg the blessing of the gods. Who comes to claim her? Theon's gaze remained locked on Diana. Theon then turned to Torrhen Stark. Theon of House Stark, heir to Winterfell. Theon Stark's gaze turned towards Theon Mormont, a respectful nod accompanying his question. Who gives her? Theon Mormont's voice boomed slightly in the quiet Godswood. Theon of the House Mormont, Lord of Bear Island, who is her father? Lady Diana Mormont, Torrhen then said, his gaze turning to her, do you take this man to be your husband, to share his joys and sorrows, to stand by his side in times of peace and peril, for all the days the old gods grant you? Diana took Theon's hand in his, her grip firm and unwavering. I do. Torrhen then shifted his gaze to Theon and asked, Theon Stark, do you take this woman to be your wife, to cherish her, to honor her, and to protect her against all the darkness that may come, for all the days the old gods grant you? As the ancient words hung in the air, Theon took Diana's hands in his. Her emerald gaze softened as she looked up at him, and a profound sense of belonging settled within him. I do. The sound of the wind rustling through the weirwood's branches seemed almost like a blessing, a whispered promise from the old gods themselves. As Theon leaned down to kiss Diana, sealing their vows beneath the ancient heart tree, a deep sense of peace settled over him. The world seemed to fade around them, leaving only him and her bathed in the pale light filtering through the snow-dusted branches. In that moment, they believed that nothing could ever break the bond they had just forged. Hand in hand, they turned to leave the courtyard, the sacred silence of the old gods still echoing in their minds like a soft hum. No words were needed. The moment had been too profound to tarnish with idle chatter. Their few family members and friends, who had borne witness to the ceremony, hung back, respecting the sanctity of their new union. Husband and wife. As Theon and Diana left the heart tree, the northern lords cheered and rushed forward with congratulations. The mighty wolves found his she-bear. A great match for the north, boomed Lord Umber. Lady Hornwood welcomed Diana, and Lord Manderley offered a toast to the happy couple. Theon and Diana, overjoyed, accepted the lords' warm wishes. The atmosphere was filled with excitement as the wedding party headed to the great hall for the wedding feast, promising a night of joyous celebration and stronger bonds between the northern houses. Inside the great hall, the celebration was in full swing. Lords, relieved and joyful, conversed freely, their earlier solemnity replaced with festive cheer. Laughter echoed through the hall as Lord Manderley regaled his neighbors with tales of White Harbor, his voice booming over the music. Ladies, adorned in their finest furs and jewels, exchanged pleasantries and congratulations, their smiles as bright as the hall's many candles. Even the usually taciturn Lord Reed was seen sharing a rare smile and a cup of ale with Lord Flint, their conversation a low rumble amidst the general merriment. The hall buzzed with a sense of camaraderie and shared joy, a welcome respite from the worries of winter. As Theon and Diana ascended the dais in the great hall, the lords began to present their wedding gifts, each offering a token of their esteem and well wishes. Lord Ragnar Lothbrok, a man with a weathered face and piercing blue eyes, approached first. He presented a magnificent stag skin, thick and supple, its fur a rich tapestry of browns and grays. A gift for warmth in the long winters, and for good fortune in the hunt, he announced in a strong, clear voice, the stag a symbol of strength and prosperity in the north. Following Lord Ragnar, other lords came forward with their offerings. Lord Serwyn presented a pair of sturdy hunting hounds, their leashes held by a young kennelmaster. May these hounds bring you joy and aid in your hunts, Lord and Lady Stark. Lady Tallheart gifted a finely woven tapestry depicting the history of House Stark, its intricate threads telling tales of courage and resilience. Lord Flint offered a chest filled with ironwood, a valuable resource for the long winters ahead. Each gift was unique, reflecting the character and resources of the house presenting it, a tangible representation of the North's support for their future lord and lady. As the feast drew to a close, a lord, emboldened by the ale, raised a cry, betting. Betting. Several others took up the chant, eager to observe the traditional betting ceremony. However, before anyone could proceed, Theon Stark swept Diana into his arms in a swift, bridal carry. With a determined look in his eyes, he strode out of the great hall, leaving the stunned guests in his wake. He didn't give anyone a chance to touch his bride or follow custom. In their bedchamber, Theon gently placed Diana on her feet. They stood for a moment, gazing at each other in the soft candlelight. A small smile played on Theon's lips as he reached out to brush a stray strand of hair from Diana's cheek. "You are even more beautiful than the day I met you, Diana," he murmured, his voice husky with emotion. Diana's cheeks flushed, and her eyes sparkled. "And you, Theon," she replied, her voice equally soft, still as clueless as the day we met. She reached up to trace the strong line of his jaw. Theon chuckled, his gaze never leaving hers. "What can I say? I feel lost in those eyes of yours." Lost? Diana raised an eyebrow, a playful smirk dancing on her lips. "The mighty wolf of Winterfell, lost? I find that hard to believe." Theon stepped closer, his hand still gently framing her face. "Only when I look at you. You've bewitched me, Diana Mormont." "Bewitched?" she echoed, but her voice was breathless now, the playful tone softening. "Is that truly the word you'd use, Theon Stark?" "The only one that fits," he whispered, his gaze dropping to her lips. "From the moment I saw you on Bear Island, I knew my life would never be the same." Diana's heart pounded in her chest. "You were rather quiet about it at the time," she teased, though her voice betrayed her own growing emotion. "A Stark always plays his cards close to his chest," Theon countered, his thumb gently stroking her cheekbone. "But my heart spoke volumes, even then." "And what is your heart saying now, my lord?" Diana asked, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes searching his. Theon's eyes burned with an intensity that made Diana's breath catch in her throat. "It's saying that I've waited a lifetime for this moment, and that you are everything I've ever wanted." Theon didn't answer her question with words. Instead, he lowered his head, his gaze locked on hers. His first kiss was feather-light, a tentative exploration of her lips that sent a shiver down Diana's spine. It was a kiss that spoke of reverence and a long-held desire finally given voice. Diana sighed softly into the kiss, her hands finding their way to his shoulders, her fingers curling into the fabric of his tunic. The gentleness of the kiss deepened, becoming more assured, more demanding. Theon tilted his head, deepening the connection, and the world outside the circle of their embrace seemed to fade away. Then, the kiss shifted. The tenderness flared into passion, a hunger that had been simmering beneath the surface. Theon's hold tightened, his lips becoming more insistent, and he kissed her with a fierce intensity that stole her breath away. Diana met his passion with her own, her lips parting willingly, her body leaning into his. Theon broke the kiss, his breath mingling with hers, his eyes dark with desire. He trailed kisses along her jawline, his hands moving to the fastenings of her gown. With deftness born of anticipation, he slowly began to undo the delicate clasps and laces, revealing the soft velvet beneath. Diana shivered, not from cold, but from the heat that was building between them. Her gaze never left his as he worked, her fingers reaching up to help him with his own clothing. When the gown finally pooled at her feet, Theon stepped back for a moment, his eyes sweeping over her with an appreciative gaze. A low chuckle rumbled in his chest. "You are even more beautiful than I imagined," he murmured, and then, with a playful grin, he swept his arms beneath her and lifted her off her feet. Diana gasped, surprised but delighted. Before she could even react, Theon carried her the few steps to the bed and gently tossed her onto the soft furs, his eyes sparkling with mischief and love. Theon quickly shed his own garments, his eyes never leaving Diana as he undressed. The Stark gray cloak and tunic fell to the floor, followed by his boots and breeches. He stood before her for a moment, his gaze filled with adoration. Then, he knelt beside the bed, reaching out to gently stroke her cheek. His touch was tender, filled with a reverence that spoke volumes of his feelings for her. He leaned in, whispering soft words of affection against her skin, his breath warm against her ear. He took his time, exploring her body with gentle hands and lips, learning the curves and contours that had haunted his dreams for so long. His touch was patient and loving, focused entirely on her pleasure. He wanted this first time as husband and wife to be a tender and cherished memory for them both. Diana's breath hitched, her body arching slightly under Theon's tender ministrations. The sensations he was creating were exquisite, building within her with an intensity that was becoming almost unbearable. She reached for him, her fingers digging lightly into his shoulders. "Theon," she murmured, her voice husky and urgent, her eyes filled with a raw desire that matched his own. The gentleness was still there, a foundation of love beneath it, but the need was undeniable now. She shifted restlessly, her gaze locking with his. "Please," she breathed, her voice a low plea. I need you now." Theon's eyes darkened, his own desire flaring in response to Diana's words. The tenderness didn't vanish, but it was now entwined with a fierce urgency. He shifted, positioning himself between her thighs, his gaze searching hers for confirmation. At her eager nod, a low growl rumbled in his chest. He entered her slowly, filling her completely. Diana gasped, her back arching into the furs, her fingers clenching on his shoulders. The connection was deep, primal, and utterly consuming. Theon paused, giving her a moment to adjust, his gaze locked with hers. He could see the love and trust in her eyes, and it fueled the fire within him. Then, he began to move. Each thrust was deep and powerful, a testament to his strength and his need for her. Diana met him with equal passion, her hips rising to meet his, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The soft candlelight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls, illuminating their entwined bodies. The world outside the bedchamber ceased to exist. There was only the rhythm of their bodies, the heat of their skin, the sound of their breathing, and the overwhelming sensation of being completely and utterly connected. With each thrust, the tension built, coiling tighter and tighter within them, until they were both on the edge of oblivion. 3 comments 0 vote. She-Wolf. 41 AC. Winterfell. Lyra Stark Pav. The last of the celebrating had finally faded, and I was Abed, the furs a welcome comfort after a long day of smiles and endless thanks. My name day. It was a good day, I suppose, but not like the grand feasts we'd have in Winterfell. My mind wandered over the gifts I'd received. Theon gave a finely carved direwolf of wood, and Mother, a cloak with tiny silver needlework direwolves. I was thinking of them, of Jonas's daft grin, and Theon's smile, and Fatha, when a sharp knock on the door startled me. My eyes flew open. Who'd be knocking so late? I threw back the covers, the chill of the stone floor biting at me bare feet. I crossed the room and slowly drew open the heavy door. I pulled the door open, and there they stood. Theon, his face serious in the dim light, with Diana beside him, her hand resting on his arm. And behind them both, Janos, his twin, a wide, joyful grin splitting his face. What brings you here at this hour? I asked, my curiosity battling with a growing sense of unease. Janos stepped forward, his grin unwavering. We have a secret to tell you, Lara, he said, his voice unusually grave despite the smile on his face. A secret that every Stark should know. I hesitated for a moment, the lateness of the hour and the strange expressions on their faces making me wary. But the mention of a Stark secret piqued my curiosity. Come in, I said, stepping back and gesturing for them to enter. I closed the heavy wooden door behind them, the sound echoing in the sudden silence of the room. My gaze fell on Theon, and I couldn't help but notice he was clad only in his travel-stained cloak. Why are you in your small clothes, Theon? I blurted out before I could think better of it. Janos burst into laughter, the sound echoing in the room and startling a small, nervous laugh from Diana. Show her, brother, Janos said, clapping Theon on the back, though his eyes held a strange mix of amusement and something else I couldn't quite place. Theon's grin widened, a feral edge to it that sent a shiver down my spine. He met my astonished gaze, and then, impossibly, his form began to shift. It was like watching a nightmare unfold, yet I couldn't tear my eyes away. His bones seemed to lengthen and reshape themselves, his features melting and reforming. The cloak that had been draped around him rippled and flowed, becoming not fabric, but fur, thick, dark fur. Where moments before stood a man, now stood a massive direwolf, its eyes glowing with an eerie, intelligent light. I could only stare, my breath caught in my throat, my mind reeling at the impossible sight. Diana, seemingly unfazed by the transformation, stepped closer to the direwolf. She reached out a hand and began to scratch behind its ears, her touch gentle and familiar, as if she were soothing a beloved pet. The direwolf, Theon, leaned into her touch, his glowing eyes softening slightly. Janos, watching the scene with unrestrained glee, clapped his hands together. "See, Lara," he exclaimed, his smile stretching wide across his face. "My sister is magic. But it's not just her. Every Stark can do this. We can all turn into direwolves." "How?" I breathed, my voice barely audible above the low growl emanating from Theon's transformed throat. The impossible was happening before my very eyes, and I desperately needed to understand. "It's this potion," Janos said, pulling a small vial from his belt pouch. It contained a swirling, opalescent liquid that seemed to pulse with an inner light. "We call it the Lichen Potion. Drink it, and you'll be able to shift, just like Theon, just like all of us." He paused, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "And then," he added, "we're going to venture into the forest. All together." I reached out, my hand trembling slightly, and took the vial from him. The liquid inside swirled and shimmered, captivating and terrifying at the same time. I held it up, inspecting it closely, the candlelight catching the strange, otherworldly colors. "Leave me," I said, my voice firm despite the tremor in my hand. "Both of you. I need to do this alone." Theon, still in his direwolf form, hesitated for a moment, his glowing eyes fixed on me. Then, with a low growl that sounded almost reluctant, he turned and padded towards the door. Janos followed, his initial excitement replaced with a more subdued expression. He gave me a small nod as he passed, and then the heavy wooden door closed behind them, leaving Diana and me alone in the room. I stared at the vial in my hand, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt a surge of doubt. Could I really do this? Was I ready to embrace something so unnatural? Diana stepped closer, her gaze steady and reassuring. "Take it only if you are sure, Lara," she said softly, her voice a low murmur in the quiet room. "This is a path you must choose for yourself. We will be here for you, whatever you decide." Okay, here's how Diana reacts. Her words resonated within me, a strange mix of fear and determination warring in my heart. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, lifted the vial to my lips, and downed the swirling liquid in one swift gulp. The taste was indescribable. Like fire and ice, metal and earth, all at once. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, a strange sensation began to spread through my veins, a tingling warmth that quickly escalated into discomfort. It started as a subtle pressure, a feeling of being stretched. But as time passed, the discomfort intensified, growing into a searing, agonizing pain. My bones felt like they were being twisted and remade, my muscles tearing and reforming. I gasped, then choked, then screamed, the sound raw and animalistic, a sound that didn't even seem like it was coming from me. I clawed at my skin, my body convulsing, as the transformation ripped through me. Diana cried out, her face paling as she rushed to my side. Panic flared in her eyes as she watched my body contort, her hands hovering helplessly over me, unsure of what to do. "Lara, what's happening? What can I do?" Her voice was filled with a desperate worry. Then, as suddenly as it began, the searing pain subsided. The intense pressure shifted, morphing into a strange sense of becoming. My bones continued to shift, but the agony was replaced by a powerful, undeniable instinct. My skin prickled, fur sprouting in thick waves across my body. My hands and feet lengthened, becoming paws, tipped with sharp claws. My face stretched and elongated, my teeth growing into formidable fangs. I was no longer a girl. I was a direwolf, standing on 4 powerful legs, my senses heightened to an incredible degree. I could smell the faint scent of snow on the wind, hear the distant rustle of leaves in the godswood, see the world in shades of gray and silver, yet with a clarity I had never known before. Diana, her initial panic slowly giving way to awe, reached out and pushed open the door. Janos stood on the other side, a wide, shit-eating grin plastered across his face. "Well, sister," he said, his voice filled with barely contained excitement. "Let's be off to the godswood. Our wolves are waiting for us." I dipped my massive head in a nod, the gesture feeling both strange and utterly natural at the same time. We moved through the castle, Diana walking beside me, her hand resting on my thick fur, while Janos walked ahead, practically bouncing with anticipation. The sounds of the castle were different now, filtered through my heightened senses, the scurrying of mice in the walls, the distant snoring of a guard, the faint scent of wood smoke from the hearths. When we reached the godswood, the ancient trees loomed over us, their branches heavy with snow. The heart tree stood in the center, its red leaves stark against the white landscape. Janos, unable to contain his excitement any longer, let out a whoop and began to shift. His transformation was quicker than mine, his body flowing and changing until he stood beside me as a mirror image, a massive direwolf with the same dark fur and glowing eyes. Diana approached Theon, who was still in his direwolf form. She reached out, her hand stroking his thick fur, her touch gentle and loving. Then, with a running leap, she gracefully jumped onto his back, settling herself comfortably between his broad shoulders. "Shall we go?" she asked, her voice carrying a note of exhilaration. Janos and I could only nod our massive heads in agreement, our direwolf forms unable to speak human words. Janos and I could only nod our massive heads in agreement, our direwolf forms unable to speak human words. And then, we were off. We surged into the forest, our powerful legs carrying us through the snow-covered landscape. At first, the sensation was strange and disorienting. The ground felt different beneath my paws, the air filled with 1,000 new scents, the sounds of the forest amplified to an almost overwhelming degree. But as we ran, as the wind whipped through my fur and the trees blurred around us, the feeling shifted. It became natural. The wildness of the direwolf took over, and I moved with a grace and power I had never known as a human. I glanced to my side, and saw our direwolves running alongside us. They were smaller than Janos and I, more the size of normal wolves, but still larger and more powerful than any I had ever seen. My own direwolf, Leia, ran closest to me, her gray fur blending with the shadows of the trees, her green eyes shining with an intelligent light. Janos's direwolf, Loki, was a stark contrast, his fur as black as night, his green eyes gleaming with a wild energy. Behind them, I could see Father's direwolf, Fang, his dark brown fur rippling as he ran, his yellow eyes fixed on the path ahead. And Grandfather's direwolf, Crusher, his brown fur thick and powerful, his black eyes filled with a quiet strength. Theon's direwolf, Frost, was the most striking of the pack. His fur was as white as the freshly fallen snow, and his eyes were a piercing blue, like chips of glacial ice. He moved with a fluid grace, the very picture of wild beauty. And then there was Summer, her red fur a fiery contrast to the snow, her black eyes burning with a fierce spirit. She ran with a boundless energy, her every movement filled with a vibrant life. And then, we roamed. We ran through the ancient forest, our pack of direwolves surging through the snow-laden trees. We chased rabbits, their scent sharp and clear in the cold air. We howled at the pale moon, our voices echoing through the silent woods. We explored hidden glades and icy streams, our bodies moving with a freedom I had never known before. We ran until the hour of the wolf, when the moon hung high in the sky, a silver disk in the inky blackness. Then, with a shared, unspoken understanding, we turned back towards the castle. The shift back to human form was strange, a slow, tingling sensation that felt like waking from a vivid dream. We returned to our rooms, tired but exhilarated, the memory of the wild run etched into our very being. 4 comments 0 vote. Morgan. 42 AC. Winterfell. Third person POV. A year and a half had passed since the fateful wedding of Theon Stark and Diana Stark, née Mormont. In that time, Janos Stark had also taken a bride, Lena Manderly. Now, Theon Stark waited outside the birth chambers, pacing back and forth with a barely contained energy. His father, Lord Stark, stood against the cold stone wall, his expression a mixture of stoicism and paternal concern. From within the chamber came the sounds of Diana's labor, screams of pain interspersed with curses directed at her husband, Theon. "And if you so much as touch me again, Theon Stark," Diana's voice roared, "there'll be a sword waiting for you." Theon, hearing his wife's words, stopped pacing abruptly. He turned and stared at the closed chamber door, then glanced at his father, and then at Janos, who was nearby and had burst into laughter. "In 3 moons, Theon said, his voice tight, "your child will come. Then you can laugh." Janos, hearing the tone of his brother's voice, stopped laughing abruptly, a flicker of fear crossing his face. Brandon Stark, their father, simply shook his head at his son's antics. Lyra, standing nearby, placed a hand on Theon's arm. "Don't worry, brother," she said softly. "Everything will be all right." After what felt like an eternity, the sounds from within the chamber shifted. The screams subsided, replaced by the unmistakable sound of a baby's cry. A moment later, the heavy wooden door opened, and the maester emerged, a tired but triumphant smile on his face. "Congratulations, my lord," he announced, his voice carrying through the tense silence. "Your daughter is born." Theon, followed by his father, Janos, and Lyra, rushed into the chamber. The room was filled with the warm, earthy scent of childbirth. Diana lay exhausted but radiant in the large bed, her dark hair damp and tangled. A midwife stood beside her, carefully swaddled in a bundle of soft blankets. As they entered, the midwife turned and gently placed the baby in Theon Stark's arms. Theon cradled the tiny bundle, his initial apprehension melting away as he gazed down at his daughter. She had a delicate, pale complexion, framed by a surprisingly thick head of dark brown hair. Her eyes, when they fluttered open, were a striking shade of gray, so like his own. She's beautiful, he murmured, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and wonder. He then looked at Diana, his expression softening. Thank you, Diana, he said, his voice thick with emotion. How are you feeling? Diana, though clearly exhausted, managed a small smile. I'm fine, Theon, she said, her voice a little weak. Meanwhile, Brandon, Janos, Lyra, and Gillian, who was Brandon's wife, began to murmur amongst themselves, their attention focused on the baby. She has Theon's eyes, Janos observed, peering into the cradle. A true Stark. Lyra smiled. And Diana's hair. A lovely mix. Brandon stepped closer, his gaze softening as he looked at his granddaughter. A strong one, she looks. She'll need to be. Gillian added softly, she's so tiny, and perfect. Brandon then turned to Theon, his expression thoughtful. Have you decided on a name for her, Theon? He asked. Theon looked up, his face filled with a quiet pride. Morgan, he said. Morgan Stark. Brandon looked at the baby, repeating the name softly to himself. Morgan Stark, he murmured, a small smile touching his lips. It's a good name. A strong name. Lyra, standing nearby, clasped her hands together, her eyes shining. I can't believe it, she exclaimed, a delighted laugh escaping her lips. I'm an aunt. Janos grinned, stepping closer to the cradle. And I'm an uncle, he added, his voice filled with a mixture of pride and amusement. The family continued to chat for a while, their voices hushed with a mixture of awe and joy, admiring the new arrival and offering their congratulations to the proud parents. Eventually, Brandon, sensing the exhaustion in Diana's face, spoke up. We should let the mother and child rest, he said gently. The others agreed, and with final, lingering glances at baby Morgan, they quietly filed out of the chamber, leaving Theon and Diana alone with their daughter. Brandon, Theon, and Janos made their way to Lord Torrhen Stark's chambers, the weight of the recent events settling upon them. They knocked on the heavy wooden door. A moment later, a voice from within called out, Come in. The three men entered. Torrhen Stark, ancient and frail but with eyes that still held a spark of the old wolf, looked up at them from his high-backed chair. So, he said, his voice raspy but firm. Theon stepped forward, a wide smile spreading across his face. A daughter, grandfather, he announced proudly. Morgan Stark. A rare smile touched Torrhen Stark's lips. A daughter, he repeated softly, his gaze distant for a moment, perhaps recalling his own children. Congratulations, Theon, to you and Diana, he gestured with a gnarled hand. Sit, all of you. Once they were settled, Janos retrieved a bottle of northern whiskey from a nearby table. He uncorked it with a flourish and began to pour generous measures into cups for each of them. When the cups were filled, Torrhen raised his high. To Morgan Stark, he declared, his voice surprisingly strong. Morgan Stark, Brandon, Theon, and Janos echoed, raising their own cups and taking a hearty drink. A comfortable silence settled over them for a moment, the only sound the clinking of glasses on the table. Then, the conversation turned back to the newborn. She has a strong set of lungs, Janos chuckled, recalling the sounds from the birth chamber. She does, Theon agreed, a soft smile gracing his lips. Just like her mother. Brandon nodded in approval. She'll need that strength. The North is a hard land, and these are hard times. Torrhen, his gaze distant, added, she is a Stark, and the North remembers. May she bring honor to the name. The conversation about the baby's features, her dark hair, her gray eyes, her tiny hands, continued for a while, a welcome respite from the worries that usually plagued them. But as the whiskey flowed, the talk inevitably turned to the happenings in the North. Torrhen Stark leaned forward, his ancient eyes sharp. The canal is almost complete, he announced, his voice surprisingly strong. It is the giants that have quickened the building process. Brandon confirmed, nodding in agreement. And the moat will be finished within 3 years, at this rate. Which means, Torrhen added, turning to Janos, that you will be named Lord of the Moat, once it's complete. He paused, then his gaze shifted to Janos. Which brings me to another matter. As you will be the first of your line, you'll need a house name and words for your new seat. Janos shifted in his seat, a thoughtful expression on his face. I've been giving it some thought, he said. I was thinking, House Skull. It's an old tongue word for wolf. Brandon smiled, a hint of pride in his eyes. Skull, he repeated, testing the sound of it. A good name. Theon, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. And for his house words, he suggested, a thoughtful look on his face, how about, and now my watch begins. He explained, since he'll be the first to guard the north from any attacks from the south. Janos chuckled, shaking his head in amusement and appreciation. Aye, he said, grinning. That'll be it. Torrhen, listening to the exchange, simply smiled, a rare and approving expression on his ancient face. Aye, he said softly. They talked about the progress of the Moat Caelan's construction for a while longer, discussing the logistics and the challenges of the project. Eventually, Torrhen shifted the conversation to the happenings in King's Landing. There are protests, Torrhen said, his voice grave, the faith is stirring. They decry the abomination of incest, sitting on the Iron Throne. Brandon frowned. And the king is allowing this? Torrhen sighed. Aenys is a kind king, he said, choosing his words carefully, and easygoing with the lords. Some would say too easygoing. The lords take advantage. He's trying to placate the faith, to handle this diplomatically. But there's talk, whispers of the faith militant rising again. Janos furrowed his brows. Faith militant rising again, he muttered. That's as good as saying they don't acknowledge this king's right to sit the Iron Throne. And it means we should be ready for war with the faith. Theon nodded slowly. The South is jealous of our prosperity, he said, his voice hardening. If the Southern lords see an opportunity in this, if they take advantage of the situation and try to turn the faith's attention towards us, then we need to be prepared. Brandon's expression turned grim, but a hint of steely resolve flickered in his eyes. They can try, he said, his voice low and dangerous. They can try to enter the north. But they won't get past the moat. The Andals will be buried in the neck. Only. Just like their ancestors. Torrhen nodded slowly. Prince Maegor and Queen Dowager Visenya are wrought with the faith, he added, his voice a low rumble. They urge Aenys to summon the High Septon, to demand an accounting of what the faith is doing. They warn that if the faith isn't brought under control, there will be serious consequences. Torrhen paused, a weariness settling over his ancient features. But Aenys, he still seeks peace with them. We shall see what comes of it. A brief silence fell over the room, heavy with unspoken concerns. Then, Brandon turned to Torrhen. What of Skagos, father? He asked, his voice laced with a hint of concern. What news have we received? Torrhen's face hardened, his gaze becoming distant. Nothing, he said, his voice flat. Skagos has remained isolated, even after we brought them under our rule. Theon spoke up, a hard edge to his voice. I think, he said, we should remind them who they serve. Janos grinned, a flash of something wild in his eyes. Aye, he agreed. Or we could go and give them a reminder, personally. Brandon, nodding from his side, added, aye. That will do it. Torrhen considered their words, his gaze sweeping over his grandsons. It has been too long, he admitted, a hint of steel entering his voice. Too long since the Lord of Winterfell has set foot on Skagos. A show of force, a reminder, might be necessary. Like that, they talk about Skagos for a while. Then, after a while, Torrhen Stark says, his gaze softened slightly. And I've been thinking about the restoration of the first keep. The treasury is finally full enough to consider beginning the work. Brandon nodded. The first keep. Good. It's been in ruins for a long time. Theon leaned forward, a thoughtful expression on his face. It would be a powerful symbol, grandfather, he said. A testament to the strength and endurance of House Stark. Janos, however, was more practical. How long do you think it will take? He asked. And what about the cost? Even with the treasury full, it will be a monumental undertaking. Torrhen nodded slowly, acknowledging the concerns. It will be a long process, undoubtedly. Years, perhaps even a decade. And the cost, significant, yes. But it is an investment in the future of Winterfell, in the future of the North. We cannot allow the legacy of our ancestors to crumble into dust. Brandon added, and with the Moat Caelan nearing completion, we will soon have more resources and manpower available. He looked at his brothers. Perhaps we could even use some of the giants' labor, if they are willing. The conversation continued for a while longer, covering various topics related to the North's present and future. As the evening drew to a close, and the last of the whiskey was drained, they all rose to depart. 2 comments 0 vote. Maegor. 48 AC. The air in King's Landing was thick with a tension that went beyond the usual courtly intrigues. For years, whispers had snaked through the Red Keep, tales of discontent, of unease with the reign of King Aenys I. He was a kind man, some said, too kind, too gentle for the harsh realities of ruling the 7 kingdoms. He preferred diplomacy to the sword, and where his father, Aegon the Conqueror, had commanded respect through fear and awe, Aenys sought to earn it through goodwill. It was a strategy that, in the eyes of many, had failed. The faith of the Seven, ever a powerful force in the realm, had grown increasingly vocal in their condemnation of the king. Their ire was focused, burning hot, on the abomination of incest that sat beside Aenys on the Iron Throne, his marriage to his cousin, Alyssa Velaryon. The faith militant, the warrior arm of the faith, stirred once more, their numbers swelling, their voices growing bolder. Protests erupted in the streets of King's Landing, septons preaching fire and brimstone, denouncing the king and his line. The gods are wrathful, boomed one septon, his voice echoing through the crowded streets. They will not suffer this defilement of blood. Repent, King Aenys, or face their divine fury. Aenys, ever the peacemaker, tried to reason with the faith, to find a middle ground. He summoned the High Septon, hoping to calm the rising tide of fanaticism with words and concessions. But the High Septon, a man of unwavering conviction, remained unmoved. He spoke of divine law, of the purity of blood, and of the wrath of the Seven. Aenys, faced with such implacable opposition, found his efforts at conciliation slipping through his fingers like sand. Your Grace, the High Septon said, his voice cold and unwavering, this is not a matter for negotiation. It is the will of the Seven. You must cast aside your queen and repent your sin. Adding to the growing sense of instability was the presence of Maegor, Aenys's younger brother. Maegor was everything Aenys was not: strong, ruthless, and ambitious. He had the bearing of a warrior, the confidence of a conqueror, and the unwavering support of his mother, Queen Dowager Visenya. Visenya, the elder sister-wife of Aegon the Conqueror, was a force of nature, a woman of formidable will and dark charisma. She had always favored Maegor, seeing in him the echoes of their father's strength, the potential for greatness. Maegor, Visenya would say, her voice a low purr, you have the fire of Aegon in your blood. You were born to rule. Maegor, chafing under his brother's rule, saw the growing unrest as an opportunity. He believed that Aenys was weak, that he was allowing the realm to slide into chaos. He spoke of the need for a strong hand, a decisive leader who could restore order and command respect. His words found fertile ground in the ears of those who yearned for the days of Aegon the Conqueror, the days when the Iron Throne was occupied by a man of iron will. The realm bleeds, brother, Maegor told Aenys. The wolves circle. You must show them your teeth, or they will devour us all. The tensions within the court reached a fever pitch when Aenys fell ill. It was a sudden illness, a wasting sickness that drained his strength and clouded his mind. Some whispered of poison, of dark plots hatched in the shadows of the Red Keep, but there was no proof. Whatever the cause, Aenys grew weaker with each passing day, his once kind eyes growing dim and distant. Alyssa, Aenys murmured, his voice barely a whisper, hold me. As Aenys lay on his deathbed, surrounded by his weeping family and anxious courtiers, the question of succession hung heavy in the air. Aenys's eldest son, Aegon Targaryen, was the rightful heir, but he was young, untested, and lacked the charisma to command the loyalty of the realm. Maegor, on the other hand, was a seasoned warrior, a man of proven strength and resolve. Visenya, ever the pragmatist, saw the danger in allowing Aegon Targaryen to ascend the throne. She knew that the realm was on the brink of chaos, that the faith militant was poised to unleash its fury, and that the southern lords were watching, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. She believed that only Maegor could hold the realm together, only Maegor could command the respect and fear necessary to quell the unrest. We cannot risk a boy on the throne, she declared. The realm needs a king, not a child. With Aenys's life hanging by a thread, Visenya began to act. She summoned her loyalists, the lords and knights who had sworn fealty to her and her son. She spoke of the need for a strong ruler, of the dangers of entrusting the realm to a boy, and of the threat posed by the faith militant. Her words were laced with a dark power, a subtle coercion that left little room for dissent. The time for weakness is over, she told them. The time for strength has come. As Aenys breathed his last, his life flickering out like a guttering candle, Visenya moved swiftly. She declared that Maegor, not Aegon Targaryen, would be the next king. She argued that Maegor was older, wiser, and better suited to rule in these troubled times. Her words were backed by the presence of her loyalists, their hands resting on the hilts of their swords, their eyes fixed on those who might dare to oppose her. The crown is his by right of strength, Visenya proclaimed. The court was thrown into chaos. Some lords protested, demanding that Aegon Targaryen be crowned king. They spoke of the laws of succession, of the rights of the firstborn son. But their voices were drowned out by the shouts of Maegor's supporters, by the clanging of steel, and by the cold, unwavering gaze of Visenya. The boy is a weakling, shouted one lord. Maegor is the true heir of the conqueror. Aegon Targaryen, a man of courage and conviction, did not yield easily. He challenged Maegor's claim, refusing to be denied his birthright. He accused his uncle of treachery, of usurping the throne that was rightfully his. He rallied his own supporters, determined to fight for the crown. "This is my father's throne," Aegon declared, his voice ringing with defiance. "I will not surrender it without a fight." The conflict between uncle and nephew reached its climax in a brutal confrontation. Aegon Targaryen, fueled by righteous fury, confronted Maegor, his sword drawn. He accused Maegor of kinslaying, of betraying the memory of their father. Maegor, a seasoned warrior, defended himself fiercely. The clash of steel echoed through the Red Keep, a symphony of violence that marked the beginning of Maegor's reign. "You would defy me, boy," Maegor roared, his voice filled with fury. "You would challenge the blood of the dragon." In the ensuing battle, tragedy struck. Aegon Targaryen, along with his younger brother, Viserys, fell in the fighting. Their deaths, though mourned by many, solidified Maegor's hold on power. He had silenced his primary rival, eliminating the most potent threat to his claim. "No," cried Rhaena, Aegon's wife, as she witnessed the carnage. "This is madness." Maegor's ruthlessness did not end there. To further consolidate his power and ensure the loyalty of those who had supported Aegon Targaryen, he took Aegon's wife, Rhaena Targaryen, as his own. But Maegor's ambitions extended beyond a single marriage. He took multiple wives, a move that scandalized the realm and further alienated the faith. He sought powerful alliances and heirs, but his actions were seen by many as a sign of his growing madness and disregard for tradition. "A king should have many options," Maegor declared, defying the norms of the realm. The faith militant, already incensed by Maegor's usurpation and his multiple marriages, saw these acts as further proof of his depravity. They denounced him as a monster, a butcher, and a kinslayer. They called for a holy war against him, urging the faithful to take up arms and cleanse the realm of his evil. "He is the spawn of the seven hells," preached a Septon, his face contorted with rage. "He is an abomination in the eyes of the gods. His many wives are a mockery of the sacred vows." Maegor, unyielding in his pursuit of power, responded with brutal force. He led his armies against the faith militant, unleashing a campaign of fire and blood against those who dared to defy him. He sacked septs, slaughtered septons, and burned holy texts. His reign became known as the Reign of Terror, a time of darkness and fear when the seven kingdoms trembled before the king's wrath. "Kill them all," Maegor commanded. "Let the flames cleanse this filth from the realm." For 5 years, Maegor ruled with an iron fist, crushing any opposition with ruthless efficiency. He built Maegor's holdfast, expanded the Red Keep, and consolidated the power of the Iron Throne. But his victories came at a terrible cost. The realm was scarred by war, divided by hatred, and haunted by the ghosts of those who had fallen victim to his cruelty. Maegor's reign, however, was not destined to last. After 5 years of bloodshed and tyranny, his life came to a sudden and mysterious end. He was found dead upon the Iron Throne, his wrists slashed, the swords of the throne dripping with his blood. Some whispered of suicide, driven to madness by the weight of his sins and the hatred of his people. Others spoke of assassination, a plot hatched by his enemies within the court. But the truth of his death remains shrouded in mystery. What happened?" a guard stammered, staring at the gruesome scene. "Who could have done this?" As Maegor's reign of terror drew to its bloody close, a new claimant to the Iron Throne emerged. Jaehaerys Targaryen, Aenys's younger brother, declared himself king. He was a stark contrast to Maegor, young, charismatic, and determined to bring peace and healing to the war-torn realm. He garnered the support of many powerful lords, including Lord Baratheon, who saw in him the hope for a brighter future. "The realm needs healing," Jaehaerys declared. "It needs a king who will rule with justice and compassion, and respect the traditions and faiths of its people." Jaehaerys's claim, coupled with the sudden and violent end of Maegor, marked the beginning of a new era for the Seven Kingdoms. The realm, weary of war and bloodshed, yearned for stability and peace. The legacy of Maegor I, a king who had ruled through fear and violence and defied the very gods themselves, served as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of just and compassionate rule. Jaehaerys ascended the Iron Throne with his sister wife, Alysanne, by his side. Together, they embarked on a path of reconciliation and reform, seeking to mend the wounds inflicted by Maegor's reign. One of their most significant acts was to make peace with the faith, a task that required both delicate diplomacy and a firm understanding of the traditions and beliefs of the Seven Kingdoms. "We must find a way to bridge this divide," Jaehaerys told Alysanne. "The realm cannot heal while the faith remains our enemy." To achieve this peace, Jaehaerys and Alysanne, with the counsel of wise maesters and septons, crafted a compromise, a philosophical framework that would come to be known as the doctrine of exceptionalism. This doctrine acknowledged the unique position of House Targaryen within the realm, while also seeking to reconcile their Valyrian traditions with the Andal faith. We are not like other men, Jaehaerys declared before the court and the High Septon. We ride dragons, and have done so since before the doom of Valyria. No other house in this world can claim such a heritage. The doctrine of exceptionalism rested on several key tenets. First, it asserted that the Targaryens were not of Andal origin, but descended from the ancient Valyrians, a people with their own distinct laws and customs. Our roots lie not in Andalos, Alyssane explained, but in Valyria, where different traditions hold sway. Second, the doctrine addressed the controversial practice of brother-sister marriage. It argued that the Targaryens, like the Valyrians before them, had always wed brother to sister, and that this was not a matter for men to judge. The gods made us as we are, Jaehaerys proclaimed. It is not for mortals to question the blood of the dragon. To further solidify the peace with the faith and demonstrate his commitment to their traditions, Jaehaerys made a significant appointment. He named Septon Barth, a man of great learning and piety, as his hand of the king. This act, unprecedented in the history of the Seven Kingdoms, sent a powerful message of reconciliation and goodwill to the faith. Septon Barth, Jaehaerys announced, is a man of wisdom and integrity. He will serve the realm and the gods with equal devotion. The doctrine of exceptionalism, coupled with the appointment of Septon Barth, while controversial, provided a framework for understanding and accepting the Targaryens' unique place in the Seven Kingdoms. It allowed Jaehaerys and Alyssane to make peace with the faith, establishing a new era of cooperation and stability. 5 comments 0 vote. Wedding 2. 48 AC. Winterfell. Maegor the Cruel's reign of terror had finally ended, his mysterious death on the Iron Throne sending ripples of uncertainty and cautious hope throughout the Seven Kingdoms. Word of his demise, and Jaehaerys Targaryen's subsequent claim to the Iron Throne, spread from the south, though news traveled slowly and unevenly to the distant north. While the southern lords grappled with the aftermath of Maegor's brutal rule and the implications of this new king, Winterfell was filled with a different kind of celebration, one far removed from the intrigues of King's Landing. Following a solemn and sacred ceremony in the Godswood, where ancient vows were exchanged beneath the watchful eyes of the Heart Tree, the assembled lords of the north, along with their retinues, now filled the great hall. Lord Torrhen Stark's granddaughter, Lyra, was wed to Rickard Karstark, heir to Karhold, solidifying a key alliance between two of the most powerful and ancient houses of the north. The newly wedded couple received congratulations and well wishes amidst the lively wedding feast. Lord Manderley, his considerable girth making his approach a slow but jovial one, presented a chest. Lord Rickard, Lady Lyra, he boomed, his voice echoing through the hall, from White Harbor, a bounty of the sea. Fine silks woven in the free cities, enough to outfit a lady's entire household, and barrels of our finest aged mead, strong enough to warm even the coldest winter night. Lord Dustin of Barrowton, his face as sharp and unforgiving as the barrows themselves, offered a wrapped bundle. Karstark, he said, his gaze unwavering, a length of the finest Barrowton wool, dyed the deep gray of our soil. It will serve you both well against the northern winds. Lord Serwyn, a younger man with a nervous smile, stepped forward. Lord Rickard, Lady Lyra, he stammered slightly, holding out a pair of intricately carved hunting spears. From Serwyn, these spears are fletched with the feathers of the snow owl. May your hunts be fruitful. Lord Tallheart, his voice hearty, presented a hound. A gift for you both. This is Fang, the keenest hunting dog in Torrhen Square. Loyal and swift. Lord Mormont, a man as fierce as the bears of Bear Island, offered a sturdy, iron-bound chest. Lord Karstark, Lady Stark, he said, his voice carrying authority, iron from our mines, forged by our best smiths. Enough to outfit a guard of 20 men. Lord Umber, his booming laughter preceding him, presented a massive bearskin rug. For your hearth, my lord and lady. A beast worthy of your houses. May it keep you warm. Lord Flint of Flintfinger, his eyes crinkling at the corners, offered a collection of fishing nets. From the coast, nets strong enough to haul the largest cod and salmon. As each lord presented their gift, the hall echoed with polite applause. Lyra and Rickard accepted each offering with gracious smiles. Then, Brandon Stark's sons, Janos and Theon, made their way to the dais. Janos, ever the boisterous and jovial one, stepped forward first. He unrolled a magnificent stag skin, its fur thick and dark, his voice booming, a gift for Lyra. This stag I hunted myself, in the deepest part of the Wolfswood. May it remind you of the wild beauty of the north, and the strength of its people. Theon then stepped forward, his expression more reserved. He presented a long, slender sword. For you, Lord Rickard, he said, his voice quiet but clear. He drew the blade, revealing its unique appearance. This sword is called Night's Whisper. Its blade is as black as the night, and its hilt is bound in the deepest crimson. May it serve you well in battle, and may it always bring you victory. And Lyra will tell you about its specialty afterwards. The wedding celebrations were in full swing. Laughter and music filled the great hall of Winterfell, a joyous counterpoint to the weight of the gifts presented. Then, Lord Torrhen Stark rose from his high seat. The hall, slowly but surely, fell silent. All eyes turned to the ancient lord, his presence commanding attention. He turned first to the newly wedded couple. "My dear Lyra, and you, Rickard of Carhold," he began, his voice strong despite his years, "I offer you my heartiest congratulations. May your life together be long, prosperous, and filled with the warmth of the hearth and the strength of the north." Then, he turned to address the assembled lords and ladies. "My lords and ladies," he said, his gaze sweeping across the hall, "I thank you all for coming to share in this joyous occasion, this union of two great houses. It is a testament to the strength and unity of the North." He paused, his expression turning thoughtful. "We have lived through a half-century of peace," he continued, "a time that has allowed us to prosper in ways we have not seen in generations. Our harvests have been bountiful, our storehouses are full of grain, and our cellars overflow with fine whiskey and wine." He gestured with a gnarled hand. "Our roads, once little more than rough tracks, have been improved, and trade flows more freely than ever before, bringing wealth and prosperity to our people." He continued, his voice gaining strength. "And now," he announced, a note of pride resonating in his words, "with the completion of the Great Canal, we have finally connected the Sunset Sea and the Narrow Sea. This feat of northern engineering will open up the western side of the north to trade as never before. The wealth that will flow through our lands will further enrich our holds and strengthen our people for generations to come." A resounding chorus of agreement filled the hall. Lords and ladies struck their cups against the tables, the sound echoing like a thunderclap. "Aye," they roared, their voices filled with pride and satisfaction. "Aye to the North, aye to the Starks, aye to prosperity." Torrhen held up a hand, silencing the cheers. "And there is one more matter of great importance," he announced, his gaze sweeping across the assembled lords. "The restoration of Moat Cailin, the shield of the North, is finally complete. After years of tireless work, its walls stand strong once more, a testament to the enduring strength of our people." He paused, his gaze settling on a particular figure in the hall. "Jon Stark," he called out, his voice booming like a winter storm, "step forward." Jon stepped forward. The hall watched in anticipation. "Kneel," Torrhen said. Jon knelt. Torrhen's voice boomed, "Will you protect the North, now and always?" Jon answered, his voice clear and strong, "I do." Torrhen placed a hand on Jonas's shoulder. "Then rise, Jon of House Skull, Lord of Moat Cailin." The hall erupted in cheers. Lords and ladies rose to their feet, clapping and shouting Jonas's name. Torrhen raised a hand, silencing the cheers once more. He turned back to Jon. "What are your words, Lord of Moat Cailin?" he asked. Jon stood tall, his gaze sweeping across the assembled lords. He drew his sword, the blade gleaming in the firelight, and held it aloft. "And now my watch begins," he declared, his voice ringing with determination. The hall exploded in even louder cheers. The lords pounded their cups on the tables, roaring their approval and celebrating the new Lord of Moat Cailin. The very stones of Winterfell seemed to vibrate with the force of their enthusiasm. The wedding celebrations in the Great Hall of Winterfell reached a fever pitch. Lords and ladies, emboldened by the proclamations and the flow of wine and mead, began to dance. The music, which had been lively throughout the feast, swelled to a crescendo, inviting all to join in the revelry. Morgan Stark, Theon's eldest daughter, with a grace that belied her youth, took her youngest brother, Arthur Stark, in her arms. Though barely 4 moons old, Arthur seemed content to sway gently in her embrace, his tiny hands clutching at her gown as she moved with the music. The sight of the Stark siblings, the young woman and the infant, brought smiles to many faces, a poignant reminder of the enduring cycle of life and family. Theon Stark, usually more reserved, found himself caught up in the joyous atmosphere. He danced with his wife Diana, her laughter bright and infectious as they danced and twirled across the floor. Newly named Lord Jon Skull, his face flushed with pride and perhaps a bit of wine, danced with Lena Skull, his wife, formerly Lena Manderly. They moved with a comfortable familiarity, their steps in perfect harmony, a reflection of the bond they shared. The energy of the dance gradually subsided, the music softening as lords and ladies returned to their seats. The earlier exuberance gave way to a more relaxed, conversational atmosphere, the clinking of goblets and murmur of voices filling the hall. Then, a lord named Bernard Glover rose to his feet. His expression was serious, his voice carrying a note of respectful but firm dissent. "My lords," he began, his gaze sweeping across the gathered assembly, "many among our people, both high-born and low, have long held the belief that Torrhen Stark, in his wisdom, should not have bent the knee to Aegon the Conqueror so many years ago." He paused, a shadow passing over his face. Indeed, some have even mocked him for it, calling him the King Who Knelt. A murmur of disagreement rippled through the hall. Several lords shifted in their seats, their faces darkening. That is a dangerous accusation, Glover, boomed Lord Umber, his voice filled with disapproval. Torrhen Stark saved the North from fire and blood. Lord Manderley, his face flushed, added, he did what was best for our people. Show some respect. Bernard Glover held up a hand, his expression unwavering. I know, my lords, he said, his voice calm but firm. He continued, his gaze sweeping across the hall, we have enjoyed a half-century of peace, and the North has prospered and grown stronger. All because Lord Stark understood the futility of being kings of ashes. I say he was wiser than all the lords down south. He raised his voice, his words ringing through the hall. The wise wolf. The hall erupted. Lords and ladies, their initial reservations swept aside by Glover's impassioned words, rose to their feet. Wise wolf. Wise wolf. Wise wolf. They roared, the chant echoing through Winterfell, a testament to the enduring respect for the Stark legacy. As the shouts of, Wise wolf, began to die down, a new voice rose above the din, sharp and clear. Betting. It cried. The cry was taken up by others, and soon the great hall was filled with the lusty shouts of, betting. 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 The guests, fueled by wine and tradition, began to search for the bride and groom, eager to participate in the customary ritual. But Lyra and Rickard were nowhere to be found. They had slipped away amidst the clamor of, Wise wolf, escaping the boisterous tradition of the betting ceremony. And so, the lords and ladies of the North continued to revel, feasting and celebrating well into the hour of the wolf. 5 comments 0 vote. Funeral. 49 AC. Winterfell. A heavy silence had fallen over Winterfell, a stark contrast to the joyous celebrations of not so long ago. Lord Torrhen Stark, the wise wolf, the man who had guided the North through decades of peace and prosperity, was dead. The ancient stones of Winterfell seemed to mourn his passing, the grey walls absorbing the hushed whispers of grief that echoed through the halls. From across the vast expanse of the North, lords and ladies had journeyed to pay their respects. The banners of their houses, usually flown with pride, now hung heavy and still in the courtyard, their vibrant colors muted by the somber occasion. Inside the great hall, where laughter had recently rung so freely, a solemn gathering mourned the loss of their liege lord. Brandon Stark, Torrhen's son, stood at the head of the hall, his face etched with grief. Beside him stood his wife and children, their expressions mirroring his sorrow. One by one, the lords and ladies of the North approached them, offering their condolences for the loss of a wise and respected leader. Words of comfort, though inadequate against the weight of their shared grief, were spoken with sincerity and respect. Following the solemn funeral rites, the assembled lords and ladies knelt before Brandon Stark, pledging their fealty to him as the new Lord of Winterfell. Their voices, though subdued, carried the weight of ancient oaths and unwavering loyalty. Then, one by one, they turned to Theon Stark, Brandon's heir, a young man now facing the immense responsibility of his birthright, and swore their allegiance to him as well. The future of the North, though shadowed by loss, remained bound by the enduring traditions and loyalties of its people. The last of the northern lords and ladies had departed Winterfell, their retinues disappearing into the snow-dusted landscape, leaving behind a lingering silence. Within the ancient walls, however, the business of the North did not cease. In Lord Stark's solar, a room that had witnessed countless such gatherings over the centuries, Brandon Stark, now Lord of Winterfell, met with 2 sons, Theon, his heir, and Jon Skoll, the newly appointed Lord of Moat Cailin. The weight of responsibility hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the festive atmosphere that had so recently filled the castle. Theon broke the silence, his voice thoughtful but edged with concern. Well, he began, it seems the lords of Skagos still haven't come to Winterfell, even after repeated summons. They haven't sworn fealty to their liege lord. Janos nodded, his expression grim. Aye, he confirmed. Maybe we should remind them, personally, Theon suggested, his tone suggesting a more forceful approach. Brandon Stark sighed, the weariness of the past days evident in his voice. So it seems, he said, the words carrying a note of reluctant acceptance. I will send ravens to all the lords, to summon their bannermen. Jonas's eyes gleamed with a grim determination. War, it is, he stated, the words hanging heavy in the air. The 3 men then turned to the grim task at hand, planning for war against Skagos. They discussed the island's defenses, its wild inhabitants, and the challenges of mounting an invasion across the treacherous Shivering Sea. They considered the strength of their own forces, the loyalty of their bannermen, and the best strategies for a swift and decisive victory. The Solar, once a place of council and administration, was now a war room, the fate of the North hanging in the balance. After a long silence, Brandon spoke, his voice heavy. There's a raven from King's Landing, he said, his gaze distant. Theon raised an eyebrow. About what? He asked, his tone curious but wary. Increase in taxes, Brandon replied, the words dropping like stones into the quiet room. Why? Theon demanded, his voice sharp with suspicion. Brandon's expression hardened. The raven states that since the North has been producing different kinds of goods and is self-sufficient with its harvest, the crown believes we can afford to contribute more to the realm. Jonas's voice was filled with barely suppressed fury. So, if we prosper, he said, his hand clenching into a fist, they want the fruits of our profits, without doing anything to earn them. Brandon nodded, his face grim. Aye, he confirmed. Theon's jaw tightened. This has Septon Barth all over it, he muttered, his tone laced with disdain. He can't allow the last bastion of the old gods to prosper too much. Otherwise, the small folk in the south might start questioning their own faith, seeing how well we thrive without the seven. From his position by the side of the room, Janos grunted in agreement. Aye, he echoed, his gaze fixed on the crackling fire in the hearth, his mind already turning to the coming conflicts, both in the wild islands to the east and the distant, grasping south. What will we do about it? He then asked, turning his attention back to Brandon. Brandon sighed again, rubbing a hand across his weary eyes. I will write back to King's Landing, he said, his voice firming slightly, and I will make it clear that we cannot increase the tax burden too significantly. Our vassals have endured a harsh winter, and any undue strain could breed discontent. Theon shook his head, a grim smile twisting his lips. They want our lords to be unhappy, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Because we are the only house in Westeros that is uncontested in its rule. They fear our strength, and they fear our prosperity. If we increase the taxes, our lords will protest. If we don't, the Iron Throne will demand explanations. Either way, we're fucked. The weight of their combined burdens settled heavily upon them. After a long moment of somber contemplation, Theon and Janos, recognizing the need for Brandon to address the matters at hand, quietly took their leave. They left Brandon alone in the solar, surrounded by the trappings of his new responsibilities, to grapple with the challenges that lay ahead. Leaving the somber atmosphere of the Lord's solar, Theon sought the open air of the Winterfell courtyard. The crisp northern air, though carrying the chill of late autumn, felt refreshing after the enclosed space and weighty conversation. He spotted Diana near the archery butts, her movements fluid and graceful as she guided their young daughter in the practice of the bow. Even from a distance, he could see the girl's focused concentration as she drew back the string. Sitting on a nearby wooden bench, bundled in furs against the cold, was their son, Arter. The boy, now a few years older, watched his mother and sister with an absorbed expression, occasionally kicking his small boots against the bench in quiet anticipation. The sight of his children, engaged in such a timeless northern pursuit, brought a fleeting moment of peace to Theon's troubled thoughts. He approached the bench and, with a quiet smile, sat down beside Arter, watching them. After a while, Diana and Morgan finished their archery practice. They walked towards Theon and Arter, their cheeks flushed from the exertion, and reached for the waterskin hanging from Diana's belt. Taking a long drink, Diana lowered the waterskin and turned to Theon, her brow furrowed slightly with concern. How was the meeting? She asked. Theon glanced at Morgan and Arter, his expression thoughtful. Why don't you two go play for a while? He suggested gently. Morgan and Arter exchanged a mischievous smile. With a shared giggle, they turned and raced off, their small figures darting across the courtyard. Once they were out of earshot, Theon turned to Diana, his usual lightheartedness absent. War with Skagos, he said, the words stark and heavy in the quiet courtyard. Diana, without hesitation, simply nodded. Her gaze met his, unwavering and resolute. Well, it was long overdue, she stated, her voice calm but firm, leaving no room for argument. After a moment of comfortable silence, she asked, her expression turning serious once more, any more news from the meeting? Theon's expression darkened. A raven from King's Landing, he said, his voice grim. They want to increase our taxes. They say that because the North is prosperous and self-sufficient, we can afford to pay more. He paused, a bitter edge creeping into his tone. Brandon is going to send a message back, explaining that our people have already suffered through a harsh winter, and we cannot take on any extra burden. Diana's eyes flashed with anger. The South, she spat, the word filled with disdain. They are craven. There is no end to their hunger for greed and power. Theon sighed, a weariness settling over his features. I know, he said, his voice low. We will try to reason with the king. That is all we can do for now. Diana's expression softened slightly, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. Well, she said, changing the subject with a teasing glint in her eyes, if you're finished with all this dreary talk of taxes and war, how about a spar? I could use a bit of practice, and you look like you could use a good distraction. Diana's playful challenge hung in the air, a welcome contrast to the earlier grim conversation. Theon, despite the weight of the matters discussed, found himself unable to resist her infectious energy. A genuine smile finally broke through his weariness. A distraction, you say? He countered, his voice regaining some of its usual warmth. I seem to recall the last time we sparred, I was the one providing the instruction. Diana laughed, a bright, clear sound that echoed in the courtyard. Oh, please, she scoffed good-naturedly. You got lucky. Besides, I've been practicing. She gestured towards the archery butts, where she and Morgan had been training earlier. I'm feeling rather limber. Theon rose from the bench, stretching his arms and legs, the tension of the meeting slowly easing from his muscles. Very well, he conceded, a spark of anticipation lighting his eyes. But don't come crying to me when you're on your back again. He knew better than to underestimate her skill. Diana was a formidable warrior in her own right, her movements a blend of grace and power honed through years of training. They moved towards the center of the courtyard, the hard-packed earth providing a suitable sparring ground. A few of the nearby guards, sensing the shift in mood, paused in their duties to watch, a small crowd gathering at a respectful distance. Even in times of somberness, the Northmen appreciated a display of martial prowess. Theon and Diana faced each other, their stances mirroring years of shared practice. They began with a series of circling movements, each testing the other's defenses, the air between them thick with unspoken understanding. The first clash of steel was a controlled explosion of force, the ringing sound echoing off the stone walls of Winterfell. The spar unfolded with a fluid intensity, a dance of steel and skill. Blows were exchanged, parried, and dodged, each movement precise and deliberate. There was a fierce competitiveness between them, but also a deep respect and trust. They knew each other's strengths and weaknesses, their styles intertwined like the roots of the ancient weirwood trees. Theon fought with a controlled aggression, his movements strong and purposeful. Diana, in turn, fought with a fluid grace, her agility and speed allowing her to counter his strength with skillful precision. The sounds of their combat, the clash of steel, the grunts of exertion, the quick, sharp breaths, filled the courtyard, drawing the onlookers further into the spectacle. As the spar progressed, the intensity increased. The blows became harder, the movements faster, the outcome less certain. Both warriors fought with a fierce determination, pushing each other to their limits. It was more than just a spar, it was a release of pent-up emotions, a way to channel the anxieties and uncertainties of the coming war and the troubles with the Iron Throne. Finally, after a prolonged and exhilarating exchange, Theon managed to gain a slight advantage. With a swift maneuver, he disarmed Diana, her sword clattering harmlessly to the ground. He held his own blade poised, the tip resting lightly against her throat. The courtyard fell silent, the only sound their ragged breathing. 8 comments 0 vote. War Council. 50 AC. Winterfell. The year turned, and a new year dawned upon the north, bringing with it not the promise of spring's thaw but the chilling winds of war. Ravens had flown from Winterfell to every corner of the vast land, carrying Brandon Stark's summons. Now, the lords of the north had gathered within the ancient walls, their banners a somber display in the courtyard, their faces etched with the grim determination that mirrored their liege lords. They had come to answer the call, to discuss the plan against Skagos. Inside the great hall, the atmosphere was thick with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. At the high table, Brandon Stark sat in the main seat, the weight of his new lordship heavy upon him. To his right sat his son, Theon, a seasoned warrior whose presence offered a measure of grim comfort. To his left was his other son, Jon O'Skoll, the newly appointed Lord of Moat Cailin, his expression as hard and unyielding as the fortress he now commanded. Below them, at the long tables stretching across the vast hall, the lords of the north sat in their places, the air buzzing with low conversation as they discussed the coming conflict amongst themselves. A hush fell over the hall as Brandon Stark rose to his feet. His voice, though weary from the recent loss of his father, carried the authority of generations of Stark rulers. My lords, he began, his gaze sweeping across the assembled faces, for too long, we have neglected Skagos. They have declined our summons, ignored our authority, and forgotten the obligations they owe to Winterfell. I say we remind them who their liege lord is. The words hung in the air for a moment, heavy with unspoken resolve. Then, a chorus of voices, deep and resonant, filled the hall. Aye, the lords agreed, their voices echoing the sentiment, a united front forged in the face of defiance. Brandon Stark continued, his voice ringing with the steel of command. To that end, I require that every lord commit 1/4 of their soldiers to this endeavor. My son, Theon, he declared, gesturing to his right, will be Lord Commander of this army. And I call upon all second sons to participate in this war, so they may earn merit and renown. His gaze swept across the hall, a reminder of past grievances and present resolve. We may have enjoyed peaceful times, he concluded, his voice resonating with ancient power, but winter is coming. A murmur of assent rippled through the hall, a collective nod of agreement from the assembled lords. Then, Theon rose to address the assembly. My lords, he announced, his voice clear and commanding, all soldiers are to convene at Widow's Watch in 3 moons' time. From there, we shall set sail for Skagos. He turned his gaze towards a portly lord seated at one of the tables. Lord Manderley, I entrust the preparation of 100 ships and the necessary supplies to you. If you require anything at all, do not hesitate to come to me. Lord Manderley, a shrewd look in his eyes, inclined his head in acknowledgement. It shall be done, Lord Commander, he affirmed, his voice booming with confidence. Theon's gaze swept across the hall, his expression hardening with a warrior's resolve. We will hit them hard, he declared, his voice ringing with authority, before they even know what has happened. And with those words, the tense silence in the great hall dissolved into a flurry of renewed conversation. The lords of the north, their course now set, began to discuss the logistics of raising their men, the details of the coming campaign, and the long overdue reckoning with the wildlings of Skagos. 3 moons had passed since the gathering at Winterfell. Now, at Widow's Watch, the soldiers of the north had convened, a formidable host ready to set sail. A war council was underway, the air thick with anticipation and the scent of salt and sea. Theon presided over the meeting, the main seat befitting his role as Lord Commander. To his right sat his brother, Jon Skull, and to his left, the imposing figure of Ned Umber. Around the table, their gazes fixed on the meticulously detailed maps spread before them, stood Rickon Karstark, Carlin Dustin, Osric Glover, and Ronel Bolton. Each lord, in turn, offered his opinion, the discussion a lively mix of tactical assessments and strategic proposals, as they debated the best way to strike at Skagos. Theon, tracing a finger across the map of Skagos, so, as we can see, the island is rugged, the coastline treacherous. Landing a large force in one go will be difficult. Lord Karstark, your thoughts? Rickon Karstark, leaning closer to the map, Lord Commander, I believe we should divide our forces. Smaller landing parties at multiple points along the western coast. It will stretch their defenses thin and prevent them from concentrating their strength. Carlin Dustin, shaking his head, that's too risky, Karstark. We'll be vulnerable, picked off piecemeal before we can establish a proper foothold. A concentrated assault on a single, defensible bay is the only way. Strength in numbers. Osric Glover, his brow furrowed, but which bay, Lord Dustin? Their settlements are scattered. A direct attack on one might leave others free to raid our supply lines. Ronel Bolton, his voice low and measured, perhaps a feint. Make it appear as though we intend to land in the north, drawing their warriors away from the south. Then, our main force strikes where they least expect it. Jon Skull, slamming a fist lightly on the table, enough with the cautious whispers. They're wildlings, not seasoned soldiers. We land with force, show them the might of the north, and they'll break. Ned Umber, his voice a deep rumble, Skull has a point, Lord Commander. We cannot appear hesitant, but we also cannot be reckless. We need a plan that combines strength with cunning. Theon, nodding slowly, listening intently to each contribution, these are all valid points. Lord Manderley's scouts have provided us with some intelligence regarding potential landing sites and the disposition of their inhabitants. Lord Glover, what did your men glean from those reports regarding the terrain? Osric Glover, the western coast is indeed rocky, Lord Commander, but there are a few coves large enough to land a significant number of ships. However, they are likely to be heavily defended. Rickon Karstark, which reinforces my point about multiple landings. They can't defend everywhere at once. Carlin Dustin, and spreads our forces too thin. We need to punch through their defenses, establish a secure base, and then move inland. The debate continued, each lord advocating for their preferred strategy, the weight of the impending invasion heavy in the air. The debate continued, each lord advocating for their preferred strategy, the weight of the impending invasion heavy in the air. Finally, Theon raised his hand, silencing the room. My lords, he said, his voice firm and decisive, I believe I have a plan that incorporates the strengths of our arguments. He spread his hands over the map, his gaze sweeping across the assembled lords. We will divide our forces into 3 divisions. I will lead one force, Theon declared, pointing to a location on the western coast, to Driftwood Hall. My brother, Janos, will accompany me. He then gestured to Ned Umber. Lord Umber, you will lead your division to Kingswood, along with Lord Osric Glover. Finally, he indicated the remaining lords. Lord Karstark, you will lead the last division to Deep Down, and Lords Dustin and Bolton will be under your command. A chorus of, "Aye," echoed around the War Council table. The Lords of the North, their initial reservations addressed, now stood united behind Theon's strategy. Theon nodded, his gaze sweeping across the determined faces before him. After the battle is over, he stated, we will meet again in Deep Down, to consolidate our gains and decide the future of Skagos. With the plan decided, the lords began to file out of the war room, the weight of the coming battle settling heavily on their shoulders. Each man departed for his individual quarters, where they would see to the final preparations for the invasion of Skagos. Soon, only Theon and Janos remained, the echoes of the council's deliberations fading into the quiet hum of the sea breeze outside. Janos broke the silence, leaning back in his chair with a sigh. Well, that's settled then, he said, the usual hard edge in his voice softening slightly. Skagos it is. Theon nodded, running a hand through his hair. Aye, Skagos. It's been a long time coming. He paused, a more personal note entering his voice. How are your sons, Torrhen and Alaric? Janos's stern face softened slightly. They're well. Torrhen is proving to be a natural with the blade, much like his uncle, he said, gesturing towards Theon. Alaric, though, he's more inclined to books and maps. A quiet lad, but with a sharp mind. Theon chuckled. Morgan is much the same. Give her a sword, and she'll wield it with a ferocity that would make a grown man think twice. But she also has her mother's love for stories and songs. A balance is good, Janos agreed. Torrhen could use a bit of Alaric's thoughtfulness, and Alaric could benefit from Torrhen's enthusiasm. You make them sound like two sides of the same coin, Theon observed. Much like us, in a way. Janos grunted in agreement. Perhaps. And what of Arter and young Harion? Are they showing any promise? Arter is eager to follow in my footsteps, Theon replied, a hint of pride in his voice. He's already showing a keen interest in strategy and command. Harion, well, he's still young, but he has a stubborn streak that will serve him well, I think. A good northern stubbornness, Janos said, a ghost of a smile on his lips. It's a trait that has seen us through many a harsh winter and many a hard battle. Indeed, Theon agreed. And Diana, she keeps them both grounded. She has a way with them, a patience I sometimes lack. She's a good woman, Janos acknowledged. Strong, capable, everything a Stark wife should be. She is, Theon said, his voice softening with affection. And she's made me a better man than I ever thought I could be. A good northern stubbornness, Janos said, a ghost of a smile on his lips. It's a trait that has seen us through many a harsh winter and many a hard battle. Indeed, Theon agreed. They're the future of the North. We have to make sure there's a North worth inheriting. He paused, then his gaze turned thoughtful, focusing on a point beyond the room. Which brings me to another matter. I've been giving some thought to the future of the North's defenses, beyond Skagos. Janos raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Oh, and what thoughts have you been having, brother? I believe it's time we established a proper Western fleet, Theon declared. Our strength has always been in the East, with our control of the Bight and the trade routes. But the West Coast, it's vulnerable. Too reliant on the scattered ships of our bannermen. Janos considered this, stroking his beard. A fleet, it would be a costly endeavor. And where would we base it? Moat Cailin. Theon shook his head. Too far inland. We'd need a port. Perhaps expand the harbor at Sea Dragon Point. It's centrally located, and the land there could support a proper shipyard. Sea Dragon Point. Janos mused. It has potential. But the logistics, the cost of building and maintaining such a fleet. It would be an investment, Theon conceded. But a necessary one. Think of the advantages, Janos. We could project our power further, deter raiders from the Iron Islands, open up new trade routes to the west, even explore further south, beyond the Sunset Sea. Ambitious, Janos admitted, a hint of admiration in his voice. But you're right, we can't afford to be complacent. The world is changing, and the North must adapt. Exactly, Theon said, leaning forward, his eyes gleaming with purpose. And a strong Western fleet would not only protect us, it would also give our second sons a new avenue for glory and advancement. Not all of them are destined to be lords, but they all deserve a chance to prove their worth. Theon's gaze held a spark of determination. It's a long-term vision, he acknowledged, but one I believe is vital for the future security and prosperity of the North. Janos nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. It's something to consider, brother. Something to discuss with father when this Skagos business is concluded. He paused, then a rare smile touched his lips. You always were the ambitious one. Theon chuckled, the sound echoing in the now quiet room. And you, the pragmatic one. That's why we make such a good team. He clapped Janos on the shoulder. But for now, let's get some rest. We have a war to plan, and I want my head clear. Janos agreed. Aye, rest is wise. And with that, the two brothers, their conversation drawing to a close, finally rose and made their way to their respective chambers, the weight of the coming conflict and the seeds of future ambitions settling upon them as they sought a few hours of respite before the dawn. I have removed the part where Diana says she will join the war in previous chapter. 5 comments 0 vote. Skagos. 50 AC. Driftwood Hall, Skagos. Janos Skol Pav. The salt spray stung my face as the longship sliced through the choppy waves. Around us, the fleet stretched as far as the eye could see, a formidable armada of northern might, all heading towards the forbidding shores of Skagos. The air thrummed with a nervous energy, a mix of anticipation and dread. To our left, the jagged coastline of the island loomed, a dark and unwelcoming silhouette against the gray sky. This was it, Driftwood Hall. I turned to my brother, Theon, who stood beside me at the prow, his gaze fixed on the approaching shore. His face, usually marked by a wry grin, was set in a mask of grim determination. He looked every bit the Lord Commander, the weight of responsibility sitting heavily on his shoulders. But beneath that, I could see the familiar glint of steel in his eyes, the eagerness of a warrior ready to prove himself. Ready? I asked, my voice barely audible above the creak of the ship and the roar of the wind. Theon simply nodded, his gaze unwavering. I knew that look. I'd seen it countless times before, on the training yard at Winterfell, during skirmishes with pirates and bandits, even in the heat of mock battles. It was his battle face, an impassive mask, his features seemingly carved from stone, revealing nothing of the storm of adrenaline and focus within. It was a disconcerting sight to those who didn't know him, but to me, it was a familiar reassurance. Theon was ready. The longship shuddered as the oarsmen strained, bringing us closer to the shore. The sounds of battle began to reach us, the clash of steel, the screams of men, the guttural roars of the Skago Sea. It was a chaotic symphony of violence, a stark reminder of the brutal task that lay ahead. We were about to dock. As soon as the prow of our ship scraped against the rocky beach, a hail of arrows rained down upon us. The air filled with the deadly hiss of their flight, and the screams of the first men struck. Shields up! Theon roared, his voice cutting through the cacophony. Shields up! I echoed, bellowing the command to the men closest to me. We scrambled forward, a mass of steel and leather, the arrows thudding against our shields in a deadly rhythm. We pressed on from the beach, seeking what little cover the rocky terrain offered. Jagged outcrops of dark stone became our sanctuary, a temporary respite from the Skago Sea barrage. From behind our cover, Theon's voice rang out again, sharp and decisive. Archers, knock, aim, loose. Our archers, who had been huddled behind the larger rocks, knocked their arrows and returned fire. The tide of the battle began to shift, and the Skago Sea archers on the higher ground were now forced to take cover themselves. The exchange continued for a time, a deadly dance of projectiles, until, as suddenly as it had begun, the arrow fire from the Skago Sea ceased. A tense silence fell over the battlefield. The only sounds were the crashing of the waves and the ragged breathing of our men. Then, a scout returned, reporting that the enemy had retreated to their keep, a formidable stone structure further inland. Theon, ever decisive, turned to me. They've fallen back. We're making our way to the keep to lay siege to it. As we advanced, the grim reality of our objective settled upon me. We weren't here to negotiate or broker peace. We were here to subdue, and Theon's words hinted at a ruthlessness that made even my blood run cold. When we reached the keep and began to assess its defenses, I felt compelled to speak. Theon, I said, my voice low, shouldn't we send someone to negotiate? Offer terms. He turned to me, his face devoid of any sentimentality. No, he stated flatly. There's no need for negotiation. We will eliminate all adult men of House Stain today. If the lord of the house has a daughter, then we will marry her to one of our bannermen and grant him the lands of Stain. The same will happen to the other 2 houses on this island. His gaze was hard, unwavering. This isn't a parley, Janos. It's a conquest. I nodded, my throat tight. It was brutal, but I couldn't deny the cold logic of it. This was how we Starks had maintained power for 8,000 years. Kill the enemy, take their lands, and bind their remaining kin to us through marriage, forging new alliances from the ashes of the old. Theon turned back to the keep, his gaze assessing its defenses. We'll take it by nightfall, he said, more to himself than to me. Then, he turned back, his eyes gleaming with a strategist's intensity. I need you to take 20 men. 20, I questioned. For what? For a little infiltration, he replied. The keep is well defended, but it's old. There are weaknesses, hidden passages, ways that they likely haven't used in centuries. I want you to find one. And then, I asked, already suspecting the answer. You and your 20 men, Theon continued, will climb the walls. From the back, where they least expect it. I want you inside, quiet as shadows, before they even know you're there. And once we're inside, I pressed. You open the gates, Theon said, his voice low and urgent. Let the rest of our forces in. But you do it silently. No horns, no signals. Just open them, and we'll do the rest. I nodded slowly, the weight of the task settling upon me. It was a risky plan, relying on stealth and surprise. But it was also bold, audacious, the kind of move that could break the back of the Skagosea resistance before they even had a chance to mount a proper defense. While you're playing shadows in the dark, Theon added, I'll be keeping them busy. We'll hit them from 3 sides at once, a full-scale assault, loud and brutal. All their attention will be on us, giving you the time you need to slip in. A diversion, I realized. A bloody one. The bloodier, the better, Theon confirmed. The more noise we make, the less they'll hear you. And the more men they commit to defending the walls, the fewer they'll have inside to stop you from opening the gates. He clapped me on the shoulder, his grip firm. You'll be leading the wolf pack, he said, referring to the elite company of scouts and climbers I commanded. They're the best we have for this kind of work. Trust them, trust your instincts, and get those gates open. I will, I vowed, my voice low and steady. I knew the risks, but I also knew Theon. He wouldn't send me on a suicide mission. He had a plan, a carefully calculated gamble, and he trusted me to play my part. Good, Theon said, his expression hardening once more. Then we have nothing left to discuss. Prepare your men, brother. Tonight, we take this keep. It was night, a cold, Skagosea night, the wind howling like a hungry wolf, carrying the scent of salt and blood. I stood with 20 of my best, the wolf pack, huddled in the shadows of a gnarled copse of trees at the rear of the keep. The massive stone walls loomed before us, dark and silent, a formidable barrier against the darkness. We were ghosts, barely a whisper in the night, waiting for the signal. The tension was a tangible thing, a coiled spring ready to unleash. Each man was focused, his senses heightened, every creak of a branch, every rustle of leaves, amplified in the stillness. We were climbers, scouts, infiltrators, the best the North had to offer in the art of unseen warfare. Our lives, and the success of this entire assault, hinged on our ability to move like shadows and strike like vipers. Then, a distant, ragged roar came, the unmistakable war cries of northern throats. The sound was faint, carried on the wind, but it was enough. That was Theon. That was our signal. Move, I hissed, my voice barely a breath. And like phantoms, we did. The rough stone of the keep wall bit into our gloved hands as we began our ascent. We moved in silence, each man finding his own handholds and footholds, years of training and experience guiding our every move. The wind whipped around us, threatening to tear us from the wall, but we held fast, our bodies pressed against the cold stone, becoming one with the shadows. My own senses were heightened beyond human limits, the werewolf transformation granting me an almost supernatural awareness of my surroundings. I could hear the faintest whisper of wind, smell the metallic tang of blood in the air, and feel the vibrations of the battle raging on the other side of the wall. The war cries from the front of the keep grew louder, a chaotic symphony of battle that masked our movements. We could hear the clash of steel, the screams of the dying, the guttural roars of men locked in combat. It was a brutal soundtrack to our silent climb, a reminder of the bloody work that awaited us on the other side. Higher and higher we climbed, our muscles burning with the strain. The keep was old, as Theon had said, and time had taken its toll on the stone. Cracks and crevices, worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain, provided precarious purchase for our hands and feet. We moved slowly and deliberately, and each step was a calculated risk, a test of our skill and nerves. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, we reached the top. We pulled ourselves over the battlements, one by one, our movements fluid and silent as water. We were inside. The courtyard below was a scene of chaos. Torches flickered, casting long, dancing shadows, illuminating the frenzied fighting. Men clashed, steel rang against steel, and the air was thick with the stench of blood and sweat. But here, on the walls, it was quiet, a pocket of stillness in the heart of the storm. We moved along the battlements, hugging the shadows, our eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. We were predators in enemy territory, and we moved with the stealth and precision of wolves on the hunt. Our first encounter came quickly. 2 Skagosea guards stood talking, their voices low and gruff, oblivious to our presence. I signaled to 2 of my men, and they moved forward, their daggers glinting in the torchlight. The guards never knew what hit them. A quick, silent thrust to the throat, and they slumped to the ground, their lives extinguished without a sound. We dragged their bodies into the shadows, leaving no trace of our passage. We continued our silent advance, moving deeper into the keep. We encountered more guards, patrolling the walls, their eyes fixed on the battle raging below. Each time, we dealt with them swiftly and efficiently, our daggers finding their marks with deadly accuracy. My enhanced senses allowed me to anticipate their movements, to hear their heartbeats, to smell their fear. We were like ghosts, moving through the keep, leaving a trail of silent corpses in our wake. The Skagosi were too focused on the assault at the front to notice the danger lurking in their midst. We reached a narrow staircase leading down into the keep. This was where the real challenge began. The interior of the keep would be more heavily guarded, the Skagosi warriors alert and ready for a fight. We descended the stairs, my senses heightened, every nerve on edge. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and blood, and the sounds of the battle echoed through the stone corridors. We moved cautiously, hugging the walls, my ears straining to pick up any sound. We encountered small groups of Skagosi soldiers, rushing to join the defense, their faces grim and determined. We took them down quickly and silently, using the shadows and the narrow corridors to our advantage. A quick ambush, a silent struggle, and they were gone, their bodies hidden in the darkness. My werewolf abilities granted me speed and strength far beyond that of a normal man, making each encounter swift and decisive. We were making progress, but the keep was a labyrinth of stone and shadow, and the enemy was everywhere. We had to be careful, patient, and ruthless. We reached the main gatehouse. This was our objective. The gate was massive, made of thick, iron-bound wood, and heavily barred. It was guarded by a dozen Skagosi warriors, their eyes scanning the courtyard, their weapons ready. This was going to be the hardest part. We couldn't take them all silently. We would have to fight, and the noise would alert the rest of the keep. I signaled to my men, and we spread out, taking cover behind pillars and archways. We were ready. I gave the signal, and we attacked. We burst from the shadows, a whirlwind of steel and fury. The Skagosi warriors were taken by surprise, their eyes widening in shock as we descended upon them. But they were seasoned fighters, and they reacted quickly, raising their shields and drawing their weapons. The gatehouse erupted in a cacophony of violence. Steel clashed against steel, the air filled with the grunts of exertion and the cries of pain. I fought with a ferocity born of my werewolf heritage, my enhanced strength and speed allowing me to cut through their ranks with brutal efficiency. My men fought with courage, each one a veteran of countless battles, their movements fluid and deadly. We were outnumbered, but we were better trained, better equipped, and driven by a single purpose, to open those gates. We fought back to back, a circle of death in the heart of the gatehouse. The Skagosi warriors fought bravely, but they were no match for our combined skill and determination. One by one, they fell, their bodies crashing to the stone floor. The battle was fierce and brutal, but it was short. In a matter of minutes, the gatehouse was ours. The floor was slick with blood, and the air hung heavy with the stench of death. But the gate was still barred, a massive barrier between us and the northern army outside. I ordered my men to find the mechanism to open the gate. We searched frantically, our hands slick with sweat and blood, our ears straining to hear the sounds of the battle raging outside. Finally, one of my men found it, a large iron lever, hidden behind a tapestry. With a heave, he pulled the lever. A grinding, groaning sound filled the gatehouse as the massive bars began to retract. Slowly, inexorably, the gate began to open. A cheer erupted from the northern army as they saw the gate swing open. They surged forward, a tide of steel and fury, pouring into the keep. The battle was far from over, but the tide had turned. We had breached the Skagosi defenses, and the Northmen were coming. Theon led the charge, his twin swords, Jon and Theo, a whirlwind of death, cutting down any Skagosi who dared to stand in his path. He fought with a grim determination, his face splattered with blood, his eyes burning with a cold fury. The Northmen fought with renewed vigor, inspired by their Lord Commander's bravery, pushing the Skagosi back towards the heart of the keep. The fighting was fierce and chaotic. The narrow corridors and open courtyards of the keep became a slaughterhouse, the air thick with the stench of blood and the sounds of screaming men. The Skagosi fought with the desperation of cornered animals, but they were outnumbered and outmatched. As Theon pressed forward, he found himself face to face with Lord Stain, the Skagosi leader. Stain was a large man, his face twisted with rage and defiance. He roared a challenge and charged at Theon, his own weapon a crude but deadly axe. Theon met his charge with a cold face. He parried Stain's clumsy blows with ease, his movements fluid and precise. It was clear he was toying with the Skagosi lord, a predator playing with its prey. He could have ended the fight quickly, but he seemed to relish the moment, drawing out Stain's fear and humiliation. He dodged Stain's wild swings, his twin swords flashing in the torchlight, leaving shallow cuts on the Skago Sea Lord's arms and legs. Stain roared in pain and frustration, his attacks becoming more desperate and reckless. Finally, Theon had enough. With a swift, decisive move, he disarmed Stain, sending his axe clattering to the ground. Stain stood before him, defenseless, his eyes wide with terror. Theon raised his twin swords, Jon and Theo, his face impassive. He paused for a moment, letting the silence amplify the tension. Then, with a smooth, powerful thrust, he plunged Jon through Stain's throat. The Skago Sea Lord gurgled, his blood spurting onto Theon's armor. His eyes widened in disbelief, then glazed over as life ebbed away. Theon withdrew his sword, the blade dripping crimson. Lord Stain's body slumped to the ground, his reign of defiance finally over. 2 comments 0 vote. Ice Dragon. 50 AC. Skagos. Jono's skull. A week had passed since we conquered Skagos. The initial fury of the battle had subsided, replaced by the grim work of occupation and the uneasy peace of victory. We had placed a landed knight in charge of the keep, a temporary measure until a proper lord could be appointed. As it turned out, Lord Stain had no daughters, no female heirs at all. With his death, House Stain was extinct, its line ended in the blood-soaked courtyard of Driftwood Hall. Now, we were all making our way back to the ships, the long journey home beckoning. Theon turned to me, his expression serious. Make sure all the other ships leave for Deep Down, he instructed, his voice low and commanding. You, me, and 10 members of the Wolfpack are to remain. We have somewhere else to go. I opened my mouth to question him, to ask where he intended to lead us, but he cut me off with a sharp look. I can't answer you now, he said, his voice firm, but trust me, Jonos. This is important. I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. I had learned long ago that Theon often had his reasons he didn't always share until the time was right. I said, turning to the other captains. You heard the Lord Commander. Set sail for Deep Down. We'll follow shortly. We watched as the fleet, one by one, pulled away from the shore, their sails catching the wind, heading north towards Deep Down. It wasn't until the last ship had disappeared over the horizon, swallowed by the vastness of the sea, that Theon turned to me. All right, he said, his voice low, let's go. He gestured towards our waiting longship. Skane Island. I simply nodded. You heard the Lord Commander, I told the Wolfpack members gathered around us. Set sail for Skane. The next day, the jagged peaks of Skane Island rose from the horizon, a stark and forbidding silhouette against the morning sky. The air was cold and crisp, carrying the scent of salt and the promise of whatever awaited us on that isolated isle. I turned to Theon, who stood beside me at the prow, his gaze fixed on the approaching land. Skane is in sight, Lord Commander, I said, my voice carrying over the creak of the ship and the slap of the waves. Should we prepare to dock? Theon shook his head, his eyes scanning the horizon beyond Skane. Not Skane, he replied, his voice low and intense. We're heading further north. There's another island just beyond it. If my guess is correct, what I'm looking for will be there. And what exactly are you looking for? I asked, my curiosity finally getting the better of me. He turned to me, a strange glint in his eyes. You'll see, was all he said. And so, we sailed on, the mystery of our destination hanging heavy in the air. It was midday when the island finally came into view, a desolate, windswept rock rising from the churning sea. This was it, the last island in the shivering sea, a lonely sentinel guarding the edge of the world. Beyond it lay only the endless expanse of the frozen ocean, and beyond that, the land of always winter. The island itself was a picture of bleakness, bare, rocky, and seemingly devoid of any life. The island itself was a picture of bleakness, bare, rocky, and seemingly devoid of any life. As we prepared to dock, Theon turned to me, his expression resolute. You and I are going to explore this island, he declared. The rest of the men are to stay on the ship. I opened my mouth to protest, to ask why, but he cut me off with a sharp gesture. He didn't say another word, simply turned and began to move towards the shore. I knew that look. I knew Theon. He could be as stubborn as a mountain when he wanted something, and once he'd set his mind on a course, there was little anyone could do to sway him. So, I followed him. We left the ship in the relative safety of the shore, and started to move towards the center of the desolate island, the wind whipping around us, carrying the eerie silence of the place. We walked for what felt like hours, the sun beginning its slow descent towards the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the barren landscape. Theon moved with a purpose, his gaze constantly scanning the rocky terrain, searching for something. He still hadn't said a word about what he was looking for, leaving me to follow him in silence, my mind filled with questions and a growing sense of unease. We searched for a while, the sun beginning to dip below the horizon. Suddenly, Theon stopped, and I bumped into him. I turned to see why he'd halted, and what I saw made my jaw drop. Before us was a nest. A nest of dragons. There must have been 10 of them, at least. They were magnificent, terrifying creatures, their scales shimmering in various shades of white and blue, their eyes glowing with an ancient, otherworldly light. I was speechless, rooted to the spot in awe and disbelief. I turned to look at my brother. All I saw was a triumphant look on his face. Then, to my horror, Theon started to walk towards the largest dragon. I tried to stop him, to shout a warning, but he ignored me, his gaze fixed on the colossal beast. The dragon, hearing his footsteps, lifted its massive head and looked at him with a curious, ancient gaze. Theon reached the dragon and, to my utter astonishment, spread his arms and bowed his head slightly. The dragon regarded him for a moment, its eyes like molten gold, then let out a deafening roar. I panicked, my heart pounding in my chest. It's going to eat him, I thought, my mind reeling. I tried to shout, to warn him, but my voice was frozen in my throat. I didn't want to startle the creature, to provoke it further. The dragon lowered its head, bringing its snout closer to Theon. My breath hitched in my throat. Theon lifted his head and looked the dragon directly in the eye, his expression calm and resolute. Then, he removed his glove and pressed his bare hands against the dragon's snout. He began to speak to the dragon, his voice low and melodic, but the dragon only rumbled deep in its throat, a sound that vibrated through the very ground beneath our feet. And then, I began to question my sanity. Theon started to climb the dragon. He moved with a surprising agility, his hands finding purchase on the rough scales, his body moving with a fluid grace that seemed almost unnatural. The dragon, for its part, seemed to tolerate his ascent, its massive head turning slightly to watch him, its golden eyes filled with an ancient curiosity. He reached the dragon's neck, the scales there larger and smoother. He settled himself onto the broad expanse of its back, gripping the bony ridges that ran along its spine. The dragon shifted slightly, its powerful muscles flexing beneath him. Then, with a deep, resonant roar that shook the very air, the dragon spread its massive wings. They unfurled like vast, leathery sails, catching the wind with a sound like thunder. The ground beneath us trembled. The dragon took off, with Theon on its back. I watched, rooted to the spot, as they soared into the sky, the wind screaming past them, the ground falling away beneath them. The world stretched out before them, a vast panorama of sea and sky. Theon, however, seemed completely at ease, his face alight with an almost manic joy. He urged the dragon higher, his voice a strange, melodic language that I couldn't understand, yet somehow felt deep within my bones. The dragon responded, its powerful wings beating in a steady rhythm, carrying them higher and higher, towards the setting sun. He made the dragon do barrel rolls and all kinds of maneuvers. I watched, my mind reeling, as they danced across the sky. Theon, a tiny figure on the back of the colossal beast, seemed to be one with the dragon, his movements and the dragon's intertwined in a breathtaking display of power and grace. It was a sight that defied all reason, a spectacle that I knew I would never forget. As the last rays of the sun painted the sky in hues of orange and gold, Theon and the dragon began their descent. They circled the island once, twice, then landed gently back near the shore, the dragon's massive form casting a long shadow over the desolate landscape. Theon dismounted the dragon with a fluid grace, his feet landing lightly on the rocky ground. He turned and made his way towards me, a wide, almost manic smile on his face. I stood there, rooted to the spot, watching both him and the dragon with a face frozen in shock. He reached me and gave me a playful, almost brotherly, jerk. "Brother," he said, his voice filled with exhilaration, "are you all right?" I just stammered, my words failing me. How? He grinned, his eyes shining with an almost otherworldly light. "The old gods showed me, brother," he said, his voice hushed with reverence. And then it hit me. I forgot. My brother has the green dream. He turned back towards the dragons, his hand outstretched. "Come," he said, gesturing to the other dragons. "Approach them. Try." I shook my head, fear gripping me. "No," I said, my voice trembling. "I can't. I won't." He turned back to me, his expression pleading. "Please, Janos," he urged. "Trust me. The old gods want us to do this. We need to do this." I hesitated for a long moment, torn between my fear and the desperate plea in his voice. He continued to urge me, his words filled with a conviction that was hard to ignore. Finally, with a deep breath, I steeled myself. I made my way towards another dragon, a magnificent creature with scales of light blue and piercing black eyes. I moved slowly, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to emulate Theon's earlier actions. I reached the dragon and did the same thing my brother did. I spread my arms slightly. The dragon lowered its massive head, its gaze fixed on me. It let out a deafening roar, the sound vibrating through my very bones. Then, it brought its snout close to my body. I instinctively flinched, but held my ground. Taking a deep breath, I removed my glove, my hand trembling slightly, and pressed my bare palm against the dragon's snout. A searing, burning sensation shot through my palm. I cried out, pulling my hand away to see what had happened. A spiraling symbol, glowing with a faint, inner light, was etched onto my skin. Then, a voice echoed in my mind, clear and resonant, yet utterly alien. "What is your name, human?" I gasped, my eyes widening in disbelief. "Jono's skull," I managed to say, my voice a mere whisper. And it's good to meet you." I gathered my wits enough to ask its name. The voice replied, "We do not have names, as you understand them. We communicate through thought, with our kind, as I am communicating with you now." "Can I give you one?" I asked, my mind racing. "Yes," the dragon replied, the thought resonating deep within my being. I thought for a moment, searching for a name that felt right, a name that captured the dragon's essence. "Sylvie," I said finally. "I will call you Sylvie." The dragon hummed the name, a sound that seemed to vibrate with approval. "Sylvie, it is pleasing. Can I ride you, Sylvie?" I asked, a surge of adrenaline coursing through me. "Yes," came the reply. I began to climb, my fear replaced by a strange sense of exhilaration. As I reached Sylvie's back and settled myself onto her massive form, I looked over at Theon. He was doing the same, climbing onto the back of the largest dragon, his face alight with a triumphant grin. I settled onto Sylvie's back, gripping the large scales for purchase. The leather of my boots felt strangely inadequate against the immense power beneath me. Sylvie shifted, her muscles rippling, and then with a powerful beat of her wings, we were airborne. The sensation was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The wind roared in my ears, but it wasn't jarring, it felt like the breath of the world itself. Sylvie moved with a surprising grace for her size, soaring upwards in wide, majestic arcs. Beside us, Theon and his immense white dragon climbed into the sky as well, their silhouettes stark against the deepening hues of the setting sun. We flew in tandem, the two dragons moving with an unspoken understanding. Theon, ever the more daring, began to put his dragon through more aggressive maneuvers, sharp turns, swift dives, and breathtaking climbs. His laughter, carried on the wind, sounded almost manic, a pure expression of exhilaration. Sylvie, though seemingly calmer, responded to my unspoken will. It wasn't like guiding a horse, it was more like an extension of my own thoughts, a merging of minds. I leaned, and she responded, banking gracefully to the west as the sun began its final descent, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange, red, and gold. We circled the desolate island, the long shadows of the dragons stretching across the barren landscape below. The smaller dragons in the nest watched us, their glowing eyes following our every move. It felt like we were part of something ancient and powerful, a secret revealed at the edge of the world. Theon, with a whoop of delight, urged his dragon into a series of barrel rolls, the massive creature turning end over end against the vibrant canvas of the sunset. Sylvie and I followed suit, the world blurring around us in a dizzying display of aerial acrobatics. As the last sliver of the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in twilight hues of purple and deep blue, we continued our flight. The air grew colder, the stars beginning to prick the darkening expanse above. The only sounds were the rhythmic beat of the dragon's wings and the rush of the wind. There was a profound sense of freedom in riding Sylvie, a feeling of being unbound by the constraints of the earth. I looked over at Theon, his face illuminated by the faint glow of his dragon's scales, and saw the same sense of liberation reflected in his eyes. We flew in silence for a while, simply enjoying the magic of the moment, two brothers soaring through the twilight sky on the backs of ancient beasts. It felt like a dream, a fantastical vision made real by the will of the old gods and the bond we had somehow forged with these magnificent creatures. Finally, as the first stars shone brightly in the night sky, Theon let out a triumphant cry and began to descend. Sylvie, sensing my unspoken command, followed suit, our descent as graceful and effortless as our flight. We were no longer just Jono's and Theon's skull, we were dragon riders, and the world had just become a whole lot bigger. As we landed, Theon dismounted his dragon and turned to me, his face glowing with excitement. "What did you name yours?" he asked, his voice filled with pride. "Sylvie," I replied, a smile spreading across my face. "And yours?" "Saphira," he said, the name rolling off his tongue with a sense of reverence. I nodded, still trying to process the events of the evening. "So, now what?" I asked. Theon's expression turned serious. Now, he said, as the bond between us and our dragons increases, the distance by which we can communicate with them will also increase. But we can't show the dragons to outsiders. If the South hears of them, they will panic and do stupid things. Where will we hide them? I asked, looking back at the magnificent creatures. They can live underwater, Theon explained, so they can hide at Long Lake north of Winterfell. But first, we need to increase the bond with our dragons. We have to come here again, with our family, and stay for a while. You bring your sons, Torrhen and Alaric. I will bring Morgan and Arter. Harrion is still too young, so we can't risk it. We will contact Lyra and ask her if she or her sons want to bond with the dragons. I frowned, a sense of unease settling in my stomach. Don't you think it would be better for the dragons to remain only in the Stark family? I asked. I think only I am enough. If, in the future, one of my descendants were to rebel with the help of a dragon, it would be bad. Theon just smiled, a knowing, almost cryptic smile. It won't, he said, his voice filled with an unsettling certainty. Why won't it happen? I pressed, my concern growing. Theon's smile softened, though it still held a hint of mystery. The lichen potion, he explained, it doesn't just change our bodies, Janos. It changes our minds, too. It instills in us a pack mentality. A deep, unbreakable bond with our blood, our true blood. He paused, his gaze intense. As they say, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. That's why I allowed Lyra to give the potion to Rickard Karstark and his family. If the potions had been present during the Grey Starks' time, I mused, they wouldn't have rebelled. Theon agreed, a hint of sadness in his voice. I fell silent, lost in thought. The lichen potion, it was more than just a transformation. It was a bond, a connection to something primal and powerful. And it had the potential to change everything. I began to consider the implications, the ways we could use it to strengthen the North, to ensure its unity and survival for generations to come. After a while, we turned back to the dragons, promising to return soon with our family. We spoke to them of our plans, of the need for secrecy, and of the bond we hoped to forge. Then, with a final farewell, we retreated to our ship and set sail towards Deep Down, leaving the dragons to their ancient vigil in the heart of the Shivering Sea. 13 comments 0 vote. Deep Down. 50 AC. Deep Down. Third-person POV. As their ship approached the docks, they could see a small group of northern lords waiting for them. Ned Umber, Rickon Karstark, Osric Glover, Ronell Bolton, and Carlin Dustin, their faces etched with anticipation and excitement. Theon and Janos disembarked, and the lords stepped forward to greet them. Ned Umber, a large, boisterous man, asked Theon. Lord Commander, he boomed, welcome back. We'd heard you dealt with the Stains at Driftwood Hall. Theon inclined his head. The fighting was decisive, Lord Umber. We secured Driftwood Hall. Osric Glover, a more reserved man, spoke next. And House Magnar of King's House, Lord Umber and I took that task. Ned Umber grinned. Aye, we did. The Magnars were tougher than the Stains, but we prevailed. King's House is ours. Theon Stark, his eyes sharp and calculating, raised an eyebrow. And Deep Down, Lord Karstark, Lord Dustin, and Ronell Bolton, I trust you had success with the Krells. Rickon Karstark, a man of few words, nodded. We dealt with them. The Krells resisted fiercely. There was a battle. Carlin Dustin, a pragmatic man, nodded. A swift end. Good. Skagos has been a thorn in our side for too long. Janos met their gaze. We all fought as the North demands. The Skagosi were fierce, but they were ultimately no match for the combined strength of our forces. Ned Umber clapped his hands together. Well, that's that then. Skagos is ours. Lord Stark will be pleased. He looked at Theon. What are your plans now, Lord Commander? Will you be returning to Winterfell? Theon hesitated for a moment, his gaze sweeping over the assembled lords. Not immediately, he said. We have other matters to attend to. Matters of great importance to the future of the North. Rickon Karstark frowned slightly. Other matters? What sort of matters? Theon exchanged a look with Janos. Matters that cannot be discussed here, he said, his voice low. I will speak of them in private, at Winterfell, when the time is right. The lords exchanged glances, a mixture of curiosity and unease in their eyes. They knew Theon was not a man to be trifled with, and if he said the matters were of great importance, they did not doubt that they were. Carlin Dustin, ever the pragmatist, spoke again. Very well, Lord Commander. We trust your judgment, but know that we are here to serve the North, whatever the task may be. Theon nodded, a hint of gratitude in his eyes. I know, Lord Dustin. And when the time comes, I will call upon you. For now, let us return to Winterfell. There is much to discuss. With that, the lords turned from the docks and made their way towards Deep Down Hall. The news of their victory spread quickly, and soon the hall was filled with the sounds of celebration. The long tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, casks of ale flowed freely, and the air was thick with the mingled scents of food, drink, and the heady aroma of victory. Theon, Janos, and the lords joined in the revelry, sharing stories of the battles, honoring the fallen, and toasting to the future of the North. The feasting and drinking continued late into the night, lasting until the hour of the wolf, when the fires began to die down and the revelers, sated and weary, began to drift off to their beds. A month crawled by in deep down, each day a stark reminder of the brutal task at hand, the eradication of the Skagosi cannibals. The initial relief of victory had long since curdled into a grim determination. Theon and Janos, their faces set in hard lines, directed the systematic cleansing of the islands. One evening, as reports trickled in, Janos found Theon hunched over a map in the war room. Another village cleansed, brother, Janos said, his voice heavy. But the tales, they are sickening. Theon didn't look up. They are what we expected, Janos. Savages who preyed on the weak for generations. This had to be done. I know, Janos sighed, running a hand through his hair. But the sheer scale, are we sure this is the only way? Theon finally raised his head, his gaze unwavering. What other way is there? To let them live, to continue their abominations. No, the North will have peace on its borders, even if it's bought with blood. Raiding parties returned, their faces grim, their swords stained. Lord Umber, his usual boisterousness subdued, reported, found another altar, Lord Commander. Bones, too many to count. And signs of children, his voice trailed off. Theon's jaw tightened. Burn it. Every trace of their filth must be erased. Osric Glover, his normally reserved demeanor shaken, spoke of a desperate last stand in a hidden cave. They fought like cornered wolves, Lord Commander. But they were no match for our steel. Did any survive? Theon asked, his voice flat. None, Glover replied, his gaze meeting Theon's with a grim understanding. As the weeks passed, the flow of reports slowed. The islands began to fall silent. One evening, Janos found Theon staring out at the turbulent sea. It's almost done, Janos said quietly. Theon nodded. The silence is deafening, but it is a necessary silence. What then? Janos asked. Once Skagos is empty. Then we rebuild, Theon said, turning back from the window. We bring Northmen, loyal families. We build fortifications, establish trade. Skagos will become a shield for the North, not a wound. Lord Dustin, ever pragmatic, raised a concern during a strategy meeting. The cost, Lord Commander. In men, in resources. The cost of inaction would have been far greater, Lord Dustin, Theon countered sharply. A festering sore left to poison us all. The psychological toll weighed heavily on the Northmen. Ronel Bolton, his usual sardonic wit absent, admitted to Janos, I've seen my share of battles, Janos. But this was different. Hunting down people like animals. They were animals, Bolton, Janos said, his voice firm. They forfeited their humanity long ago. As the final reports came in, Theon gathered the lords on the desolate shores of Driftwood Hall. Skagos is cleansed, he declared, his voice echoing across the empty land. A dark chapter in the North's history has been closed. Let us not speak of it again, save to remember the price of vigilance. Lord Karstark, his face grim, simply nodded. It is done. In the weeks that followed, the sounds of construction began to replace the echoes of violence. The North began the slow, arduous process of claiming Skagos as their own. One evening, as they prepared to finally depart for Winterfell, Janos looked back at the distant shores of Skagos. Was it worth it, Theon? He asked quietly. Theon met his gaze, his own eyes holding a weariness that went beyond mere exhaustion. It had to be done, Janos. For the North. For our people. He paused, then added, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, and perhaps, for something more. The final night before their departure from Deep Down arrived, heavy with the weight of the past month. Theon, ever pragmatic, decided a feast was in order. Not a celebration, but a gathering, a chance for the lords and warriors to break bread, share stories, and perhaps, finally, begin to heal. The great hall of Deep Down, usually echoing with the boisterous energy of Krall men, felt different. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meat and ale, but a somber undercurrent lingered beneath the surface. The faces of the men were etched with exhaustion and the lingering shadows of what they had witnessed. Theon surveyed the hall from the high table, his gaze sweeping over the assembled lords. He saw Ned Umber, his booming laughter noticeably absent, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by a quiet contemplation. He saw Ronel Bolton, his sardonic wit muted, his sharp eyes still haunted by the images he couldn't shake. He raised his goblet, the silver gleaming in the flickering candlelight. My lords, he began, his voice carrying through the hall. We have accomplished a grim task. We have cleansed Skagos of a darkness that plagued our shores for too long. A murmur of agreement rippled through the hall, a collective acknowledgement of the burden they had all carried. We have seen things, Theon continued, his voice low, that will stay with us. Things that will test our strength and our resolve. But we have also shown our strength. We have shown the strength of the North. He paused, his gaze meeting each lord in turn. Tonight, we do not celebrate. But we gather. We remember those we lost. We honor those who fought. And we look forward to the future we have secured. Ned Umber, his voice rough with emotion, stood and raised his own goblet. To the fallen, he roared, the hall echoing his words. May they find peace in the halls of the old gods. The hall erupted in a chorus of, to the fallen. Goblets clinked, and the somber mood began to shift, ever so slightly, towards a shared sense of camaraderie and resilience. Janos, seated beside Theon, leaned closer. It was a good idea, brother, he said quietly. They needed this. Theon nodded, a rare hint of a smile touching his lips. We all did, he admitted. As the evening progressed, the atmosphere in the hall began to lighten. Stories were shared, not of the horrors they had witnessed, but of battles fought long ago, of hunts in the Wolfswood, and of the enduring spirit of the North. Even Ronell Bolton, after a few tankards of strong ale, found his sardonic wit returning, albeit tempered with a newfound respect for the men around him. He regaled the table with a tale of a particularly stubborn Skagosi warrior, his words drawing reluctant chuckles from his companions. Carlin Dustin, ever the pragmatist, spoke of the plans for Skagos, of the families who would settle there, of the new fortifications that would rise from the ashes of the old. His words offered a sense of hope, a vision of a future built on the sacrifices they had made. As the night wore on, the feasting and drinking continued, but the mood had shifted from somber remembrance to a quiet celebration of survival and resilience. The men of the North, bound together by their shared experience, found solace in each other's company. Theon, watching the scene unfold, felt a sense of grim satisfaction. The scars of Skagos would remain, but the North would endure. And tonight, at least, they could find a moment of respite, a brief respite from the darkness they had faced. As the hour of the wolf approached, the fires in the hearth began to die down, casting long shadows across the hall. The lords, their faces weary but their spirits lifted, began to drift off to their chambers, carrying with them the shared memories of the evening. Theon and Janos remained at the high table for a while longer, the silence between them filled with a quiet understanding. They had faced the darkness together, and they had emerged, scarred but unbroken. Finally, Theon stood, stretching his weary limbs. It is time, he said, his voice low. Tomorrow, we return to Winterfell. Janos nodded, rising to join him. Aye, he said, and we will carry the burden of Skagos with us. But we will also carry the strength we found here, in each other. 4 comments 0 vote. Winterfell. 50 AC. Winterfell. Third person POV. 3 moons had passed since the grim tidings from Skagos had reached Winterfell, followed by the eventual news of its brutal pacification. Now, the lords of the North were gathered in Lord Brandon Stark's solar, the weight of the recent conflict still palpable in the air. Lord Brandon, his face etched with the burdens of leadership, sat at the head of the long, carved table, the ancient Stark sigil of the dire wolf looming behind him. To his right sat Theon, his eldest son and heir. To Brandon's left was his other son, Janos Skull. Around the table, the lords of the North were arrayed, their expressions ranging from grim satisfaction to lingering unease. Lord Brandon's eyes narrowed. The lords continued to discuss the details of the resettlement and the future of Skagos, the weight of their decisions heavy in the air. Lord Brandon's eyes narrowed. The lords continued to discuss the details of the resettlement and the future of Skagos, the weight of their decisions heavy in the air. Finally, Brandon spoke, his voice resonating with authority. Now that the Skagos war is settled, he declared, there should be rewards for those who fought so valiantly. A chorus of agreement echoed around the table. The lords nodded, their expressions reflecting a shared sense of justice and gratitude. Brandon continued, his gaze sweeping across the assembly. Lord Bolton, he said, addressing Ronell, for your service in taking Deepdown, you shall be granted the keep itself, and all its surrounding lands. Ronell Bolton inclined his head, a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. My thanks, Lord Stark. House Bolton will hold Deepdown in your name. Brandon turned to Ned Umber, his voice booming with approval. Lord Umber, your courage and strength were instrumental in the capture of King's House. Therefore, King's House and its lands are yours to hold. Ned Umber beamed, his chest swelling with pride. A generous reward, Lord Stark. House Umber will not forget your benevolence. Finally, Brandon addressed Rickon Karstark, his tone warm with appreciation. Lord Karstark, for your role in securing Deepdown, that driftwood hall and its lands shall be yours. Rickon Karstark, ever stoic, offered a rare smile. A just reward, Lord Stark. House Karstark will hold it well. Brandon nodded, his gaze sweeping over the newly ennobled lords. I expect your new house names, words, and sigils to be presented to me as soon as possible, he added, his voice firm and authoritative. The lords who had been granted the new holdings nodded in assent. It shall be done, Lord Stark, Ronell Bolton replied, his voice smooth and confident. Ned Umber echoed his agreement with a hearty, "Aye, Lord Stark." We will not delay. Rickon Karstark, with a rare hint of enthusiasm, added, House Karstark will present its new sigil with all due haste. Brandon then turned his attention to all the assembled lords, his expression serious. There is another matter of great importance, he announced. The recent events on Skagos have highlighted a vulnerability in the North's defenses. Therefore, I intend to create a standing Northern Army and Navy, comprised of 20,000 well-trained soldiers. These men will patrol our roads, guard our coasts, and ensure the safety of our people. He looked directly at Lord Wylis Manderley. Lord Manderley, he stated, you will be in charge of the construction of the Eastern Fleet. Then, his gaze shifted to Theomore Mormont. Lord Mormont, he continued, you will be in charge of the construction of Western Fleet, to be based at Sea Dragon Point. Turning to Osric Glover, Brandon declared, Lord Glover, you will be responsible for the training of the army on the ground, ensuring they are disciplined and ready for any threat. Finally, he fixed his gaze on Carlin Dustin. Lord Dustin, he concluded, you will be the overall commander of the Northern Navy, coordinating both the Eastern and Western fleets. The Solar buzzed with a mixture of surprise, concern, and cautious optimism. Brandon Stark's announcement had thrown a new element into the already complex discussions about Skagos. Lord Manderley, stroking his beard thoughtfully, spoke first. A standing navy, Lord Stark. On this scale, it will be a costly endeavor. Necessary, Lord Manderley, Brandon countered. We have neglected our coasts for too long. The Ironborn are not the only threat that could come from the sea. Lord Mormont, his usually gruff voice filled with a hint of excitement, added, Sea Dragon Point is a strategic location, Lord Stark. But it will require significant investment to make it a true naval base. The investment will be made, Lord Mormont, Brandon assured him. The safety of the North is paramount. Osric Glover, a practical man, raised a more immediate concern. Training 20,000 men, Lord Stark, that is a significant undertaking. Where will we find the resources, the instructors, the time? We will draw from the best warriors in each holdfast, Theon interjected, his voice firm. Experienced soldiers, seasoned veterans. We will create a force that is second to none. Lord Bolton, ever the pragmatist, inquired, and who will command this army on land, Lord Stark? Who will be our warden of the ground? Brandon's gaze swept across the assembled lords. That is a matter that requires further consideration. But for now, Lord Glover, your focus is on training and you are in charge of them. I trust you will select your most capable officers. Carlin Dustin, his eyes gleaming with a newfound purpose, spoke with authority. I accept the command of the Northern Navy, Lord Stark. I will ensure that our fleets are well manned, well equipped, and ready to defend our shores. The lords continued to discuss the logistics of Brandon's plan, debating the best ways to raise and train the new forces, the allocation of resources, and the potential impact on their own holdfasts. Lord Umber, despite his initial surprise, voiced his support. A strong army and navy, it's what the North needs. We've been too reliant on our own defenses, scattered and vulnerable. A unified force will make us stronger. The discussion continued late into the night, the lords debating the finer points of Brandon's plan. They argued about the types of ships to be built, the weapons to be forged, the tactics to be employed. But beneath the debate, there was a growing sense of purpose, a renewed determination to strengthen the North and prepare it for whatever challenges lay ahead. The memory of Skagos, and the vulnerability it had exposed, served as a stark reminder of the need for vigilance and preparedness. As the hour of the wolf approached, the lords began to disperse, their minds filled with the weight of the tasks that lay before them. But before they could leave, Brandon Stark spoke again, his voice thoughtful and carrying a hint of intrigue. There is one more matter, gentlemen, though perhaps less pressing than the defense of the North. The mountains of Skagos. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled lords. During the campaign, were any of you, or your men, observant of the terrain? Did you notice anything unusual? Any geological features that stood out? Lord Umber, ever the practical man, spoke first. The land was harsh, Lord Stark. Volcanic rock, mostly. Jagged and unforgiving. Not a place I'd want to go looking for pretty stones. Osric Glover nodded in agreement. A desolate place. Our focus was on clearing the cannibals, not prospecting for ore. Janos, however, spoke up, his voice quiet but firm. There were veins of color in some of the rock faces, Lord Stark. Blues and greens, mostly. I assumed they were mineral deposits, but I am no surveyor. Brandon then said thoughtfully, mineral deposits, gold, silver, or copper, perhaps. Skagos has always been considered a barren wasteland, a place of savagery and death. But if there are valuable resources to be mined. Lord Manderley, always thinking of trade and prosperity, stroked his beard thoughtfully. It could change everything, Lord Stark. Imagine the wealth that could be extracted from those mountains. It would strengthen the North beyond measure. Ron L. Bolton, ever pragmatic, raised a skeptical eyebrow. If there are any resources, we shouldn't get ahead of ourselves. It could be nothing more than fool's gold. We won't know unless we look, Brandon countered. Therefore, I propose we send a team of skilled miners and surveyors to Skagos. They will assess the potential of the land, determine the extent of the deposits, and report back to us. Lord Karstark, ever cautious, voiced his concern. Sending more men to Skagos, is it wise, Lord Stark? After what happened there? The islands are cleansed, Lord Karstark, Brandon assured him. And these men will be protected. But the potential rewards outweigh the risks. If Skagos holds valuable resources, it could transform the North. The lords discussed the logistics of the expedition, debating who should lead it, what equipment they would need, and how best to ensure their safety. A sense of cautious optimism began to fill the solar, the prospect of untapped wealth adding a new dimension to their plans for the future of the North. As the meeting concluded, the lords began to file out of the solar, their voices fading as they dispersed to attend to their own duties. Soon, only Brandon, Theon, and Janos remained, the heavy oak door closing behind the last departing lord. Brandon turned to his sons, his expression serious. There is something else, he said, his voice low, something that cannot be discussed openly, even among the lords of the North. Theon and Janos exchanged a look, a silent understanding passing between them. The ice dragons, Janos stated, his voice equally hushed. We found ice dragons, father. We thought they were a myth, a tale whispered by the wildlings beyond the wall. But they are real. Theon then added, I had a vision, father. A dream that showed me where to find them, on Skane Island. It also showed me how to bond with them. They don't speak as we do, they communicate through our minds. Then Theon explained, his voice still filled with a sense of wonder. It's not like hearing words, father. It's thoughts, feelings, a shared understanding. And the stronger the bond, the greater the distance over which we can communicate. Brandon leaned forward, his brow furrowed in concentration. Greater distance. You mean you can only speak to them when you are close? For now, Janos confirmed. But Theon believes that as our bond with them grows stronger, the range will increase. Eventually, we might be able to communicate across vast distances. Brandon absorbed this information, his mind racing. The implications were staggering. Dragons, ice dragons, capable of telepathic communication, and bound to his sons. The potential power, the potential danger, it was almost too much to comprehend. And how do you propose to strengthen this bond? He asked, his voice cautious. By spending time with them, Theon replied. By being near them, sharing our thoughts and feelings, learning from them. It's a connection that needs to be nurtured. And you believe this is safe? Brandon questioned, his gaze fixed on Theon. These are wild creatures, Theon, of immense power. What if they turn on you? They won't, Theon said with a certainty that surprised even himself. I know it. They are ancient, wise. They have seen things we cannot even imagine. They are not inherently hostile. Janos added, we believe they are a part of us, father. A part of our blood, perhaps. The old gods, they showed us this, in a way. Brandon sighed, running a hand through his hair. The old gods, and now dragons. What else will this world reveal to us? He looked at his sons, his expression a mixture of concern and determination. Very well. If this bond is so crucial, then we must proceed with caution. But we must proceed. The potential benefits are too great to ignore. We were thinking, Theon began, of taking our sons to Skane Island. Torrhen and Alaric, and our sister, Lyra, and her sons, Morgan and Arter. To introduce them to the dragons, to see if they, too, can form a bond. Brandon considered this, his gaze thoughtful. Harrion is too young, he said. It would be too dangerous for him. But the others, yes. It is a risk, but a calculated one. It is vital, father, Janos emphasized. The dragons are not just a weapon. They are a legacy, a connection to something ancient and powerful. We must ensure that this legacy continues. Brandon nodded slowly, his decision made. Then we will go. We will take our families to Skane Island, and we will see if this bond can be forged anew. But we will do so with caution, with reverence, and with the full understanding of the power we are dealing with. The three of them continued to discuss the dragons late into the night. They talked about the logistics of the journey to Skane Island, the preparations they would need to make, and the potential dangers they might face. They debated the best way to introduce their children to the dragons, how to teach them to communicate, and how to ensure their safety. They also discussed the long-term implications of the dragon's return. Should they be kept secret, a weapon to be used only in times of dire need? Or should their existence be revealed, a symbol of the North's renewed power and connection to the old gods? Theon and Janos argued for the latter, believing that the dragons were a gift, a sign that the North was destined for greatness. Brandon, however, was more cautious, wary of the potential for fear and misunderstanding. The South would panic, he said, his voice grim. They would see dragons and think of conquest, of fire and blood. We cannot risk a war over this. But keeping them secret forever is not sustainable, Father, Janos argued. The dragons are part of us now. They are part of our future. Theon added, and they could be a powerful ally against the true enemy, the one that threatens us all. The White Walkers. Brandon fell silent, considering this. The threat from beyond the wall, it was a constant shadow over the North, a threat that grew ever more ominous with each passing year. Perhaps the dragons could be the key to defeating them, a weapon against the ice itself. As the hour of the wolf approached, the fires in the hearth had died down to embers, casting long, dancing shadows across the solar. The three men, weary but resolute, finally brought their discussion to a close. We will continue this in the morning, Brandon said, rising from his chair. There is much to consider, and we have a long journey ahead of us. Theon and Janos nodded, their faces etched with a mixture of determination and apprehension. They knew that they were on the verge of something momentous, something that could change the fate of the North forever. With a final, shared look, the three men retreated to their chambers, each carrying the weight of the dragons and the future of the North upon their shoulders. The fate of the North, it seemed, now rested on the wings of ice and fire. 5 comments 0 vote. King's Landing 350 AC. Red Keep. Third person POV. The small council chambers in the Red Keep hummed with the usual blend of routine and simmering intrigue. Around the polished mahogany table, the key figures of the realm were assembled. At the head of the table sat King Jaehaerys Targaryen, his presence commanding and wise. To his right was his sister-wife, Queen Alysanne Targaryen, her keen eyes and thoughtful expression reflecting her influence. To his left was the hand of the king, Septon Barth, a man of both piety and shrewd intellect. The other members of the council were also in attendance. Grand Maester Bennifer, his face a mask of scholarly knowledge, Lord Torrhen Stark, the Master of Coin, his demeanor suggesting a careful and meticulous mind, Lord Daemon Balarion, the Lord Admiral, a seasoned mariner with a lordly bearing, and Esser Ryam Redwyn, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, his posture radiating both authority and unwavering loyalty. The small council convened, and King Jaehaerys presided with his usual calm authority. We have much to discuss today, he began, his gaze sweeping across the table. Let us turn our attention first to the Dornish marches. Lord Commander, what news from the border? Esser Ryam Redwyn, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, stepped forward. The skirmishes continue, Your Grace. Dornish raiding parties cross the border, striking at our settlements and then retreating into the Red Mountains. Our forces have retaliated, but the terrain favors the Dornish, and they are difficult to pin down. This has been a persistent problem, Jaehaerys sighed. What measures are being taken to address it? We have reinforced the border garrisons, Your Grace, Esser Ryam replied, and increased patrols. Lord Paramount Baratheon assures me he is doing everything in his power to maintain order. However, a lasting peace with Dorne remains elusive. The council discussed the complexities of the Dornish situation, acknowledging the long history of conflict and the challenges of fighting in the harsh and unforgiving terrain. They considered various strategies, from offering concessions to launching a full-scale invasion, but no easy solution presented itself. Queen Alysanne, ever seeking a path of peace, suggested, perhaps a renewed effort at diplomacy is in order, my husband. A royal envoy, bearing gifts and assurances of our good intentions, might open a dialogue with Prince Corran. Jaehaerys nodded thoughtfully. A reasonable suggestion, my dear. We shall explore that possibility. But in the meantime, we must remain vigilant and protect our borders. The council then turned its attention to the construction of the Dragon Pit, a massive undertaking that had been underway for several years. Lord Torrhen Stark, the Master of Coin, provided an update on the project's progress. The work proceeds apace, Your Grace, he reported. The foundations are laid, and the main structure is beginning to take shape. However, the costs have been considerable, and we have encountered some unexpected delays due to material shortages. Delays are unacceptable, Jaehaerys stated firmly. The dragon pit is of vital importance to the security of the realm, and it must be completed as soon as possible. See to it that the necessary resources are allocated, Lord Oakheart, and that any obstacles are overcome. The council discussed the strategic importance of the dragon pit, recognizing its potential to house and control the Targaryen dragons, a formidable deterrent against any potential threats to the realm. They emphasized the need for both speed and quality in its construction, ensuring that it would be a lasting symbol of Targaryen power. Grand Maester Bennifer then raised the issue of the faith of the Seven, a matter that often required delicate handling. There have been some rumblings of discontent, Your Grace, he reported, particularly in the Reach, regarding certain royal decrees. Some of the more zealous Septons believe that Your Grace's policies are not always in accordance with the teachings of the Seven. Which policies, specifically? Jaehaerys inquired, his tone cautious. The recent edict on the rights of bastards, Your Grace, Bennifer explained, and the continued presence of certain, unorthodox scholars at the Citadel. These matters have caused some unease among the faithful. The council discussed the delicate balance between respecting the faith and upholding the authority of the crown. They recognized the importance of maintaining good relations with the most devout, but they also understood the need to govern the realm according to reason and justice. Queen Alysanne, with her deep understanding of the common people, offered a pragmatic perspective. The small folk are generally devout, my husband, but they are also practical. As long as we provide them with justice and prosperity, they are unlikely to be swayed by the more extreme elements within the faith. Jaehaerys nodded in agreement. Wise words, my dear. We must tread carefully, but we will not be swayed from our course. The laws of the realm apply to all, regardless of their birth or their beliefs. The council continued to discuss the various challenges facing the realm, from the threat of Dornish incursions to the complexities of religious tensions. They debated, they advised, and they sought solutions, all in the service of maintaining the peace and prosperity of the Seven Kingdoms. The council continued to discuss the various challenges facing the realm. Finally, King Jaehaerys turned his attention to a matter that had been notably absent from the discussion thus far. And what of the North, Lord Fossoway? He asked, addressing the Master of Whisperers, Karen Fossoway. What news have you gleaned from that distant land, particularly regarding the situation on Skagos? Lord Fossoway shifted uncomfortably. The North remains elusive, Your Grace. I have yet to successfully place any of my agents within their holdfasts. They are a secretive people, fiercely loyal to House Stark and wary of outsiders. Indeed, Jaehaerys murmured, his expression thoughtful. Their customs and traditions are quite different from those in the south. But surely you have managed to gather some information regarding the Skagos campaign. Only what little I can glean from merchants and travelers, Your Grace, Fossoway admitted. They speak of a swift and brutal end to the Skagosi rebellion. Lord Brandon Stark took a firm hand, I am told. The islands are now under northern control, though the cost was said to be high. A firm hand is often necessary in such matters, Jaehaerys observed. Skagos has been a thorn in the North's side for generations. But a high cost, that is concerning. Do you have any details? Only rumors, Your Grace, Fossoway replied. Tales of widespread slaughter, of entire villages wiped out. But these are just whispers, and may be exaggerated. The Northmen are not known for their delicacy in war. Jaehaerys sighed, a flicker of concern crossing his usually serene face. Brutality is sometimes the price of peace, he murmured, more to himself than to the council. But we must be mindful of the consequences. A pacified Skagos is a victory, but not if it sows further resentment. Queen Alysanne, ever perceptive, spoke with a quiet authority. There is more to the north than Skagos, husband. We have received reports of significant developments in recent years. Developments that could have a profound impact on the realm. Canal that connects the Sunset Sea and the Narrow Sea is complete, Alysanne announced, a hint of pride in her voice. The trade routes through White Harbor have become even more lucrative, and the flow of goods into the north has increased dramatically. Lord Beesbury, the Master of Coin, confirmed this. The ledgers bear it out, Your Grace. The north is experiencing a period of unprecedented prosperity. Their coffers are full, and their people are well fed. And the roads, Alysanne continued, her eyes gleaming. The roads that Lord Stark has commissioned, stretching across the north like veins of stone. They have connected the holdfasts, facilitated trade, and brought a new level of efficiency to their economy. Septon Barth, however, remained impassive, his expression unreadable. Prosperity is a blessing, Your Grace, he said, his voice measured. But it can also be a curse. Wealth can breed pride, and pride can lead to ungodly ambitions. Are you suggesting the North is becoming a threat, Septon? Jaehaerys asked, his tone hardening slightly. Not a threat, Your Grace, Barth clarified, his gaze unwavering. But, independent. They have always been a proud people, bound by their own traditions and their own gods. This newfound wealth and self-sufficiency, it could lead them to forget their place within the Seven Kingdoms. Alisan, surprisingly, offered a more nuanced perspective. There is some truth to what the Septon says, husband, she admitted. The North is different. Their ways are not our ways. And while their loyalty has never wavered, their pride and independence are undeniable. We must acknowledge that their prosperity could make them less reliant on the South, and that could lead to complications. Complications. Jaehaerys frowned. What kind of complications? Perhaps not in your lifetime, or mine, Alisan said. But in the future, as the North grows stronger and more self-sufficient, they may begin to question the need for a king who sits so far away, a king who does not share their gods or their customs. You make it sound as though the North is on the verge of secession, Jaehaerys said, his voice sharp with disbelief. Not at all, Alisan clarified. But we must be aware of the potential for future tensions. We must foster a relationship of mutual respect and understanding with the North, not one of dominance and dependence. Their strength should be seen as an asset to the realm, not a threat. The council fell silent, the weight of the discussion hanging heavy in the air. The North, it seemed, was becoming a subject of increasing interest and unease in the South. Its newfound prosperity, while a boon to the realm in some ways, also raised questions about its future role within the Seven Kingdoms. The silence stretched, broken only by the crackling of the candles. Jaehaerys, his brow furrowed, considered Alisan's words. He knew his sister-wife possessed a keen understanding of the realm, often seeing nuances that others missed. So, what do you propose, my dear? He finally asked, his voice thoughtful. How do we ensure the North remains a loyal and integral part of the Seven Kingdoms, even as it prospers? Alisan's expression softened. We show them the same respect and understanding that they have shown us, husband. We acknowledge their strengths, their traditions, and their contributions to the realm. We foster trade and cooperation, not just dependence. And perhaps, she added, a hint of a smile playing on her lips, once the major issues in the South are settled, we could make a royal progress to the North, to demonstrate our commitment to all parts of the realm. Jaehaerys considered this, a spark of interest igniting in his eyes. A royal progress to the North. It had been many years since a Targaryen king had ventured beyond the Neck. It would be a grand undertaking, a demonstration of the crown's interest and goodwill. It is an intriguing idea, he admitted. A progress to the North would certainly send a powerful message. But it would be a long and arduous journey, and there are many other matters that demand our attention. The matters we have discussed today, Alisan reminded him gently. The Dornish skirmishes, the dragon pit, the concerns of the faith, these are all important, husband. And they should be addressed. But we should also look to the future, and the future of the North, and its relationship with the South, may prove to be even more crucial in the years to come. Jaehaerys nodded slowly, his decision seemingly made. Very well, he announced, his voice firm. We will address the pressing matters in the South, and I will give serious consideration to a royal progress to the North once those issues are resolved. In the meantime, we will ensure that the North is treated with the respect and understanding they deserve. He then turned his gaze to the rest of the council. As for the other matters, we will proceed as discussed. Lord Commander, see to the strengthening of our defenses along the Dornish marches. Lord Oakhart, expedite the construction of the Dragon Pit. And Grand Maester Bennifer, continue to monitor the situation with the faith, and advise us on how best to address their concerns. With that, King Jaehaerys rose from his seat, signaling the end of the small council meeting. The lords and advisors followed suit, their minds filled with the matters discussed, and the long shadow of the North looming large in their thoughts. The work of governing the Seven Kingdoms, it seemed, was never truly done. 2 comments 0 vote. Future plans. 50 AC. Winterfell. Third person POV. The afternoon sun slanted through the tall, arched windows of Lord Stark's solar in Winterfell, casting long shadows across the room. Brandon Stark, his face etched with the familiar lines of responsibility, sat behind the ancient desk carved with the likeness of snarling direwolves. Opposite him, Theon Stark, his eldest son and heir, listened intently, his own features reflecting a similar gravity as father and son discussed the ongoing matters of the North. As the meeting progressed, Theon shifted slightly in his seat, a thoughtful expression on his face. Father, he began, his voice measured, I have been giving considerable thought to the future of the North, to the education of our lords and ladies. Brandon raised an eyebrow, intrigued. And what thoughts have you come to, my son? I believe we should construct a university, here in the North, Theon declared, his gaze steady. A place of learning, where the sons and daughters of our noble houses can receive a comprehensive education, one that goes beyond the traditional training in arms and lineage. Brandon leaned back in his chair, considering the proposal. A university, that is an ambitious undertaking, Theon. We have always relied on maesters from the Citadel for our scholarly needs. And that is precisely the problem, Father, Theon countered. We are dependent on the South for knowledge. Our lords and ladies learn what the maesters deem important, not necessarily what is most relevant to the North. A university here would allow us to shape their education, to instill in them the values and skills that will best serve our people. And what manner of education would this university provide? Brandon asked, his curiosity piqued. A broad one, Theon explained. Etiquette and diplomacy, of course, for those who will one day rule. Health and healing, to ensure the well-being of our people. Mathematics and history, to understand the world around us and the lessons of the past. But also, he added, his voice firm, training in all forms of combat, with every weapon imaginable. Our lords and ladies must be both learned and skilled in battle, ready to defend the North against any threat. They will be learning from the best instructors in their craft. Quote. Our lords and ladies must be both learned and skilled in battle, ready to defend the North against any threat, Theon concluded. Brandon nodded slowly, absorbing the ambitious scope of his son's vision. It is a bold plan, Theon, and a costly one. But I see the merit in it. A well-rounded education for our nobility would undoubtedly strengthen the North. Theon pressed on, his enthusiasm evident. And it should not be solely for the highborn, Father. We should also allow talented individuals from the small folk to attend, if they demonstrate exceptional ability. Brandon raised an eyebrow, a hint of surprise in his expression. The small folk. That is, unprecedented. But think of the advantages, Father, Theon argued. There are undoubtedly brilliant minds and skilled warriors among the common people, individuals who could serve the North with distinction if given the opportunity. This university could be a beacon of hope, a path for them to rise above their birth. And it would benefit the lords as well, Theon continued, anticipating his father's concerns. If a lord has a promising lad in his service, a boy with a talent for numbers or a natural aptitude for swordplay, he could send him to the university. We would no longer have to rely solely on chance or wandering hedge knights to find such individuals. It would create a pool of talent, ready to serve, Theon emphasized. A meritocracy, to some extent, where ability is valued above birth. It would strengthen the bonds between the highborn and the lowborn, fostering loyalty and unity within the North. Brandon leaned back in his chair, stroking his beard as he considered the implications of Theon's proposal. He saw the wisdom in it, the potential to unlock hidden potential and create a stronger, more unified North. But he also recognized the challenges, the potential for social upheaval and the resistance from those who clung to the old ways. It is a radical idea, Theon, he admitted. But perhaps, a necessary one. The North has always been different, a land of harsh realities and close-knit communities. This university could embody that spirit, forging a new path for our people. Forging a new path for our people, Brandon mused. But where would such a university be built? It would require a significant amount of land and resources. I have considered that as well, Father, Theon replied. Just outside Wintertown, I believe. There is ample land there, and it would be close enough to Winterfell to benefit from its protection and resources, yet far enough to allow for growth and expansion. Brandon nodded, his expression thoughtful. It is a strategic location. And when do you propose we inform the other lords of this ambitious project? At the next gathering, Father, Theon suggested. We can present the plan in detail, explain the benefits, and address any concerns they may have. I believe that once they understand the potential, they will see the wisdom in it. He paused, a hint of excitement flickering in his eyes. There is something else I have been working on, Father, he added, his voice dropping slightly. Something more personal. An invention, you might call it. Brandon raised an eyebrow, intrigued. An invention? What manner of invention? It is difficult to explain, Theon admitted, a rare smile playing on his lips. It is still in its early stages, but I believe it has the potential to revolutionize everything. To usher in a new era for the North, and perhaps for all of Westeros. That is a bold claim, Theon, Brandon said, his tone a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. It is, Theon acknowledged. But I am confident in its potential. It will take time to perfect and refine. But I believe it will be ready, or at least, ready enough to be unveiled, by the next harvest festival. A thoughtful silence fell between them, broken finally by Brandon. The university is an ambitious project, and this invention of yours, it is intriguing, to say the least. But there is a more immediate matter to discuss. When do you plan to depart for Skagos? In a moon's time, Father, Theon replied. I want to ensure that all the necessary preparations are made. The journey is long and arduous, and we will be carrying valuable cargo. And who will accompany you? Brandon asked, his gaze sharp and assessing. Theon met his father's gaze steadily. I intend to take Morgan and Arter, of course. And Harrion, he is old enough now to see something of the world. My wife, Diana, will also come. She has a keen interest in healing and may be of assistance. Janos will be there, and my sons Torrhen and Alaric. My sister Lyra and her husband, Rickard Karstark, and their sons, Eddard and William. He paused, then added, we will bring them all, if they are willing, to see the dragons. It may be that not all of them will form a bond, but we should at least give them the opportunity. Brandon nodded slowly, a mixture of pride and concern in his eyes. It is a dangerous undertaking, Theon. But I understand your reasoning. The dragons, they are a force unlike any other. If more of our family can bond with them, it would strengthen us all. That is my hope, Father, Theon said. And I believe it is a risk worth taking. The two men continued to discuss the details of the journey, the supplies they would need, the men they would take as guards, and the potential dangers they might encounter on Skagos. They spoke of the logistics of transporting so many people, including the children, and the need to ensure their safety at all times. As the hour for the midday meal approached, Brandon rose from his chair, signaling the end of their discussion. We will continue this later, he said. For now, let us break bread. Theon nodded, rising as well. There are some things I need to see to in Wintertown, he said. I will take the children with me. They have been eager to stretch their legs. See that they stay out of trouble, Brandon cautioned, a hint of a smile on his face. I will, Father, Theon assured him. And so, Theon departed the Solar with his sons, Morgan, Arter, and Harrion, the four of them heading towards the bustling activity of Wintertown. The midday sun shone brightly on the ancient stone walls of Winterfell as they made their way through the courtyard, the sounds of their laughter and chatter echoing in the crisp northern air. The midday sun shone brightly on the ancient stone walls of Winterfell as Theon, Morgan, Arter, and Harrion made their way down the winding path towards Wintertown. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of wood smoke and roasted meats from the bustling settlement below. The boys, eager to escape the confines of the castle, chattered excitedly, their voices echoing in the clear northern air. As they entered Wintertown, the vibrant atmosphere enveloped them. The narrow streets teemed with people from all walks of life. Merchants hawking their wares, craftsmen displaying their skills, farmers selling their produce, and townsfolk going about their daily business. The sounds of bartering, laughter, and the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer filled the air. The first stall that caught their attention was a colorful display of fabrics and textiles. Morgan, ever the discerning one, ran his hand over a bolt of deep blue velvet, his eyes widening in admiration. Father, look at this. It's finer than anything I've ever seen. Theon examined the velvet, acknowledging its quality. It is indeed beautiful, Morgan. We shall acquire it for a new tunic. He spoke to the merchant, a stout woman with a shrewd eye, and paid the marked price, recognizing the value of the fabric. Arter, meanwhile, was drawn to a stall filled with gleaming weaponry. He picked up a finely crafted dagger, its blade shimmering in the sunlight. Can I have this, Father? Please. Theon examined the dagger carefully, testing its balance and sharpness. It is a well-made piece, Arter, he conceded. But you are still young. Perhaps a practice blade for now, and a real one when you are older and have proven your skill. He bought Arter a sturdy wooden training sword instead, much to the boy's delight. Harrion, the youngest of the three, was captivated by a stall overflowing with sweet treats. His eyes widened as he gazed upon the colorful array of honeycakes, sugared plums, and candied ginger. Father, can we get some of those? He pleaded, pointing to a particularly enticing-looking honeycake. Theon smiled indulgently. Of course, Harrion, but not too many, or you will spoil your appetite for dinner. He purchased a selection of sweets for the boys, who devoured them with gusto, their faces smeared with sticky goodness. As they strolled through the town, Theon took the opportunity to teach his sons about the people and the goods they encountered. He explained the origins of the various wares, the skills of the craftsmen, and the importance of trade to the North's economy. He wanted them to understand the lifeblood of Wintertown, the vital role it played in supporting the castle and the surrounding lands. They stopped at a leatherworker's stall, where a skilled artisan was meticulously crafting a set of intricately tooled gloves. Theon, impressed by the quality of the leather and the craftsmanship, purchased a pair for himself. The gloves were supple and strong, perfect for riding or handling weapons. At a potter's stall, they admired a collection of beautifully crafted bowls and jugs, their surfaces adorned with delicate patterns of swirling lines and stylized animals. Theon purchased a set of sturdy earthenware mugs, perfect for enjoying hot cider on a cold winter's night. As the afternoon drew to a close, Theon led his sons back towards Winterfell, their arms laden with their purchases. The boys chattered excitedly about their adventures in Wintertown, their faces flushed with the thrill of exploration and the joy of acquiring new treasures. Theon, too, felt a sense of satisfaction. The outing had been more than just a chance to indulge his sons. It had been an opportunity to connect with the life of Wintertown, to reinforce his ties to the people he would one day rule. And it had been a reminder of the vibrant spirit of the North, a spirit that he was determined to nurture and protect. As they approached the gates of Winterfell, the ancient castle loomed before them, a symbol of strength and resilience. Theon gazed upon its familiar walls, feeling a deep sense of belonging. He was a Stark of Winterfell, a lord of the North, and he would do everything in his power to ensure the prosperity and security of his people, both within the castle walls and in the bustling town below. 3 comments 0 vote. Skane. 51 AC. Island near Skane. The longship Wolfsbane sliced through the icy waters, its prow aimed at the jagged, glacial silhouette looming on the horizon. Aboard, Theon Stark stood beside his wife, Diana, her auburn hair tied back against the biting wind. Their daughter, Morgan, and sons, Arter and Haryon, huddled close, their faces a mixture of trepidation and awe. Theon's twin brother, Jono's skull, gripped the railing, his expression a mirror of Theon's, while his wife, Lena, offered a steadying presence to their sons, Torrhen and Alaric. Their sister, Lyra Karstark, stood tall with her husband, Rickard, their sons, Eddard and William, beside them. A select few of the Winterfell wolfpack, seasoned warriors all, stood ready. The air grew colder as they approached, a dry, intense chill that promised a land sculpted by ice and ancient magic. The island, a frozen monument, rose from the sea, its peaks capped with shimmering blue glaciers. "This is it," Theon murmured, his voice barely audible above the groaning of the ice floes. Diana met his gaze, her concern evident. "Are you sure, Theon? This place feels unearthly." "I am sure," Theon replied, his eyes fixed on the shore. Jonos nodded, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "The mark, it pulses stronger now." With practiced skill, the Wolfsbane navigated a treacherous channel, finally reaching a sheltered cove. As the keel grated on the icy shore, a profound silence descended, broken only by the crunch of ice and the distant, mournful cry of a seabird. The Northmen prepared to disembark, their breaths misting in the frigid air. As the Wolfsbane settled against the icy shore, the Northmen moved with practiced efficiency. A small group of wolfpack warriors, sturdy and silent, began unloading supplies, their breaths pluming in the frigid air. Others remained near the longship, their eyes scanning the desolate landscape, ever vigilant. Theon, Diana, Jonos, Lena, Lyra, and Rickard led the way, their children close behind. A few more wolfpack members, burdened with packs and provisions, followed, their footsteps crunching on the frozen ground. They moved towards the center of the island, their figures small against the vast, white expanse. The small procession of Northmen trekked across the icy terrain, the crunch of their boots the only sound in the vast stillness. After a while, Theon halted, surveying the landscape. "This seems a suitable spot," he announced, his voice carrying clearly in the crisp air. He turned to the wolfpack members carrying the supplies. "Set up camp here. We'll need shelter before nightfall." The warriors nodded, immediately setting to work. Theon then turned to his family, his expression softening slightly. "Come," he said, gesturing towards a rise in the distance. "The place we went, it's not far from here." Without question, Diana, Jonos, Lena, Lyra, Rickard, and the children followed Theon, their eyes fixed on the distant rise. Theon led his family over the rise, the wind whipping around them, carrying the scent of ice and something else, something ancient and powerful. As they crested the hill, Theon stopped, his gaze fixed on the valley below. Jonos, beside him, shared the same knowing look. "We are here," Theon announced, his voice hushed with awe. Before them lay a vast, bowl-shaped valley. In the center, nestled amongst towering formations of ice that resembled frozen waterfalls, was a frozen lake. And upon the surface of this lake, were the ice dragons. A collective gasp escaped the Northmen. The sight was breathtaking, terrifying, and utterly unlike anything they had ever imagined. The dragons shimmered with an ethereal blue light, their scales catching the pale sunlight like 1,000 frozen sapphires. Diana's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. "By the old gods!" Lyra gripped Rickard's arm, her usual stoicism momentarily abandoned. "They are real." The children stared in stunned silence. Morgan, usually so composed, could only manage a whisper. "They're magnificent." Arter, clutching his cloak, felt a surge of adrenaline, a warrior's thrill at the sight of such raw power. Even Haryon, the youngest, forgot his fear in the face of such wonder. Theon turned to his family, his expression a mixture of pride and reverence. These are the ice dragons, he said, his voice low. The creatures of legend. And they are bound to us. Bound to us? Rickard asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. What do you mean, bound to us? Janos stepped forward, his spiraling mark glowing faintly. The blood of Stark, he explained, his voice resonating with an ancient power. It calls to them, and they answer. Lena, ever practical, spoke softly. How did you find them? How did you know? Theon met her gaze. I had visions, dreams that showed me where they were, and how to reach them. And this mark, he gestured to Jonas's glowing hand, it guides us, a physical manifestation of the bond. And you can communicate with them? Diana asked, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and apprehension. In a way, Theon replied. Not with words, as we speak, but with thoughts, feelings, a sharing of minds. And they are not hostile? Lyra asked, her hand still gripping Rickard's arm tightly. Not to us, Janos assured her. They are ancient, wise. They have seen things we cannot even imagine. They are a part of us, in a way. Theon stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the largest of the dragons. They have been waiting for us, he said. Waiting for the Starks to return to them. Theon stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the largest of the dragons. A sense of deep connection resonated within him, a bond forged in dreams and solidified by the ancient mark on his brother's hand. He extended his thoughts, a clear, resonant call. Saphira, he projected, his mental voice filled with both command and affection. At the sound of her name, the largest ice dragon, Saphira, lifted her massive head. Her eyes, the color of the deepest glacial ice, snapped towards the direction of Theon and his family. A low, resonant hum emanated from her, a sound that vibrated not in their ears, but in their very bones. Then, with a fluid grace that belied her immense size, Saphira began to move across the frozen lake, her powerful strides carrying her swiftly towards them. Saphira moved across the frozen lake, her powerful strides carrying her swiftly towards them. As she drew closer, her ancient eyes fixed on Theon, a voice echoed in his mind, resonant and filled with a profound sense of recognition. You have returned. Yes, Theon replied, his thoughts clear and strong. A sense of homecoming, of ancient duty fulfilled, resonated within him. Beside him, Janos felt the familiar pull, the echo of a name in his mind. He focused his intent, reaching out to the ice dragon that had answered his call before. Sylvie, he projected, his mental voice filled with a quiet strength. Almost mirroring Saphira's actions, another ice dragon, slightly smaller but no less majestic, turned its attention towards Janos and the group. Sylvie, her scales shimmering with an almost ethereal light, began to move across the ice, drawn to her bonded Stark. Saphira moved with a regal grace towards Theon, her massive form casting a long shadow across the ice. Sylvie followed, her movements slightly more delicate, yet still carrying an immense sense of power. As the two dragons approached, Theon turned to his family, his face alight with a mixture of awe and pride. This is Saphira, he announced, his voice filled with a deep reverence. She is bonded to me, as Sylvie is to Janos. He gestured towards his brother. Janos stepped forward, his hand resting on Sylvie's snout. The ice dragon inclined her head towards Lena and their sons, a soft hum emanating from her. They are magnificent, Diana breathed, her initial apprehension replaced by a sense of wonder. More than magnificent, Theon corrected gently. They are ancient, a force of nature. And they are a part of our heritage, of the North itself. Can we touch them? Morgan asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. With respect, Janos cautioned, his gaze steady. They are not tame beasts. But they are willing to accept us, to forge a connection. Theon extended a hand towards Saphira, his palm upturned. The dragon lowered her head, her icy scales cool and smooth beneath his touch. A sense of calm, of ancient wisdom, flowed between them. She is peaceful, Theon murmured, his thoughts echoing the dragon's own. She knows our intentions. She knows we come in peace. He encouraged his family to approach, one by one. Diana reached out to Saphira, her touch hesitant at first, then growing bolder as she felt the dragon's gentle presence. Lena did the same with Sylvie, a sense of quiet understanding passing between them. The children were both awed and cautious. Morgan, ever the scholar, studied the intricate patterns on Saphira's scales. Arthur gazed at Sylvie with a warrior's respect. Even young Harrion, with a little encouragement from his father, reached out a trembling hand to touch Saphira's snout. Theon watched as his family tentatively interacted with Saphira and Sylvie, a sense of hope blossoming within him. He then turned to his sister, Lyra, and her husband, Rickard. Lyra, Rickard, he said, his voice clear and encouraging, you should try to connect with the others. You carry Stark blood as well. The bond may extend to you. Lyra exchanged a hesitant glance with Rickard. Us. We've never even been near a dragon before, let alone an ice dragon. The blood of the first men flows through your veins, Janos added, his gaze steady. It is worth trying. The potential benefits for our house, for the north, are immense. Theon nodded in agreement. There are other dragons here, younger ones, perhaps more receptive. We can guide you, help you to open yourselves to them. Rickard, ever cautious, frowned slightly. It's a great deal to ask, Theon. We are warriors, not dragon riders. And you are Starks, Theon countered gently. This is a part of our heritage, a power that has been dormant for too long. We must embrace it. We might need this power in the future, Theon added, his voice taking on a somber tone. Who knows what threats may lie ahead? The dragons could be our greatest strength, a shield against the darkness. He then turned to face Lyra and Rickard directly, his expression earnest. It is not about taming them, he explained. It is about connection. You must open your mind, your heart, to them. Feel their ancientness, their power, their loneliness. Theon gestured towards Saphira, his hand resting on her cool scales. Reach out with your thoughts, not with words. Sense their emotions, their memories. And offer them your own, your loyalty, your courage, your Stark blood. Lyra, her heart pounding in her chest, stepped forward. Her gaze fell upon a white dragon, its scales shimmering like freshly fallen snow, its eyes a piercing yellow. This dragon radiated a raw, untamed energy, a sense of wildness that made her both wary and drawn. As Lyra approached, the white dragon shifted, its massive head lowering, a low growl rumbling in its throat. It was a clear attempt to intimidate, a warning to stay away. Rickard tensed at the back, his hand instinctively moving towards his sword hilt. But Lyra held her ground. She met the dragon's yellow gaze directly, her own eyes filled with a mixture of determination and respect. She would not be cowed. She was a Stark, and the blood of the first men flowed strong within her veins. The dragon seemed to sense her resolve. It paused, its growl softening slightly. It studied Lyra, its ancient eyes assessing her. After a long, tense moment, the dragon lowered its head further, its posture shifting from aggression to curiosity. Lyra took a deep breath, her hand outstretched. She focused her thoughts, projecting a sense of peace, of kinship, of the shared heritage that bound them. She offered her loyalty, her courage, her Stark heart. The white dragon moved closer, its snout nudging her hand. A wave of icy energy washed over Lyra, a torrent of images and emotions flooding her mind. She felt its loneliness, its longing for connection. After talking with the dragon for a while, she named it Snowfire. A bond began to form, a fragile thread of understanding that grew stronger with each passing moment. Lyra felt a sense of connection, a shared spirit. With a newfound confidence, Lyra climbed onto Snowfire's back. The dragon tensed for a moment, then, with a powerful thrust of its wings, launched into the sky. Lyra, holding on tight, soared above the icy landscape, the wind whipping through her hair, a triumphant cry escaping her lips. Inspired by Lyra's successful bonding with Snowfire, Rickard stepped forward, his expression a mixture of determination and trepidation. He approached another ice dragon, this one a magnificent creature with scales the color of a stormy sky. This dragon possessed an aura of quiet strength, a sense of ancient wisdom and power. He remembered Theon's words about opening his mind and heart, about feeling the dragon's essence. Taking a deep breath, Rickard extended his hand, focusing his thoughts on the shared blood of Stark that flowed through his veins, the courage and loyalty of his house, Stark, and the ancient connection to the north. The gray dragon observed him with its piercing, intelligent eyes. It lowered its massive head, its snout close to Rickard's outstretched hand. A wave of icy energy washed over him, not as wild as the energy he felt from Snowfire, but deep and resonant, like the rumble of distant thunder. Rickard felt a name form in his mind, a name that suited the dragon's somber, powerful presence, Greysmoke. He offered the name to the dragon, a silent acknowledgement of their burgeoning connection. A bond began to form, a sense of mutual respect and understanding. Rickard, his initial apprehension fading, felt a surge of exhilaration. He had connected with a dragon, a creature of myth and legend. With a newfound confidence, Rickard climbed onto Greysmoke's broad back. The dragon tensed for a moment, then, with a powerful beat of its wings, launched into the air. Rickard, holding on tight, soared through the sky, the wind rushing past him, a cry of awe and exhilaration escaping his lips. He and Lyra now rode the ancient ice dragons. 10 comments 0 vote. Skane 2. 51 AC. Island near Skane. Third person POV. As Lyra and Rickard soared through the sky on Snowfire and Greysmoke, the children watched with a mixture of awe and envy. Morgan, ever the inquisitive one, turned to Theon. Father, she asked, her voice filled with longing, can we bond with them too? Can we ride them like Aunt Lyra and Uncle Rickard? Arter, his eyes gleaming with excitement, chimed in, please, father. I want to fly. Even young Harion, though a bit more hesitant, looked up at Theon with a hopeful expression. Theon smiled gently at his children, his heart swelling with pride at their eagerness. Not now, children, he said, his voice firm but kind. Bonding with a dragon requires strength, maturity, and a deep understanding of the ancient ways. He looked at Janos, who nodded in agreement. But, Theon continued, his gaze sweeping over all the children, you can ride with us, learn from them, and feel the power of the ice and the sky beneath you. In time, perhaps, the dragons will choose you as well. I will ride with you, father, Morgan declared, stepping forward with a determined glint in her eyes. I wish to learn all I can about them. Theon smiled, his gaze softening as he looked at his eldest child. Very well, Morgan, he said. You shall ride with me. A chorus of voices erupted from the other children. Me next, father, Arter exclaimed, bouncing on the balls of his feet. I want to fly. Even Harion, usually more reserved, piped up, me too. Theon chuckled, holding up a hand to quiet them. One at a time, my little wolves, he said. We will all have our turn. We have much time to learn and to fly together. Theon helped Morgan onto Saphira's broad back, securing her in place with straps made of dragonhide. The vastness of the dragon, the sheer power emanating from her, filled Morgan with a sense of awe and exhilaration. Janos, meanwhile, lifted Torrhen onto Sylvie, his son's face alight with a mixture of excitement and a touch of nervousness. With a powerful beat of their wings, Saphira and Sylvie launched into the sky. The icy landscape below shrank rapidly, the wind rushing past them with incredible force. Morgan gasped, her eyes widening as she looked down at the world spread out beneath her. It's incredible, she exclaimed, her voice barely audible above the roar of the wind. I can see the whole island. Theon, his hand steady on Saphira's neck, smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm. The view from up here is unlike anything you have ever seen, isn't it? It's like a dream, Morgan breathed, her gaze sweeping across the endless expanse of ice and sky. The colors, the light. Sylvie soared gracefully beside Saphira, Janos pointing out landmarks to Torrhen. Look, son, you can see the longship from here. It looks like a tiny toy. Torrhen, his initial apprehension forgotten, gripped Sylvie's scales tightly, his face split into a wide grin. Can we go faster, father? Can we fly higher? We will, in time, Janos replied, his voice filled with a quiet pride. But for now, let us enjoy the feeling of the wind beneath our wings. The two dragons soared through the sky, their movements fluid and powerful. The children, perched on their backs, laughed and shouted with delight, their voices carried away by the wind. They pointed at the glaciers below, marveling at their size and beauty. They watched the seabirds wheeling and diving, their flight patterns dwarfed by the dragon's majestic movements. Look, father, look! Morgan cried, pointing towards a distant mountain peak. It looks like a giant's tooth. Theon chuckled, sharing a look with Janos. The children's wonder was infectious, a reminder of the magic and mystery that this world held. Theon and Morgan soared through the sky, their laughter echoing in the crisp air. Janos and Torrhen flew beside them, exploring the vast expanse of the icy island. Over the next hours, the other adults who had bonded with the dragons followed suit. Lyra took Eddard and William for a ride on Snowfire, pointing out the intricate patterns of the glaciers below. Rickard, with Greysmoke, gave Alaric and Harion a more somber, but equally awe-inspiring, tour of the island's highest peaks. Each ride was a unique experience, a chance for the children to connect with the dragons and with the ancient power of their bloodline. They learned about the different types of ice formations, the habits of the creatures that inhabited this frozen land, and the history of the dragons themselves. As the day wore on, the pale sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the icy landscape. The sky deepened into hues of violet and indigo, and the stars began to emerge, glittering like diamonds scattered across a velvet cloth. By the time the last dragon had returned to the frozen lake, the island was bathed in the soft glow of the moon. The Northmen gathered around the crackling campfire, the flames casting dancing shadows on their faces. The chill of the night was kept at bay by the warmth of the fire and the thick furs they wore. But the true source of warmth came from the excited chatter of the children, their voices filled with the wonder and exhilaration of their dragon rides. Saphira was so fast, Morgan exclaimed, her eyes wide with remembered awe. It felt like we were flying at the edge of the world. And Sylvie was so graceful, Torrhen added, his voice filled with a quiet pride. She flew so smoothly, it was like gliding on the wind. Snowfire took us so high. Eddard recounted, his usually serious face softened by a smile. We saw the whole island, spread out like a map of ice and stone. Gray smoke was so strong, Alaric chimed in, his voice a low hum. He felt like a mountain moving through the sky. Even young Harrion, usually the most reserved of the group, couldn't contain his excitement. The wind in my hair. He squealed, his small hands gesturing wildly. The adults listened with amusement and a touch of pride, their own faces reflecting the joy of the children. Theon and Janos exchanged a knowing look, understanding the profound impact that the dragons had on their children. Did you see the glaciers, father? Morgan asked Theon, her voice eager. They were so blue, like frozen fire. And the mountains, Uncle Theon, Torrhen added, turning to his uncle. They looked like sleeping giants, covered in ice. Lyra and Rickard shared their own experiences, describing the breathtaking views and the incredible sensation of flying on the backs of such magnificent creatures. They spoke of the raw power of the dragons, the ancient wisdom in their eyes, and the sense of connection they felt while soaring through the sky. It is a feeling unlike any other, Lyra said, her voice filled with a quiet awe. To be one with such a creature, to feel the wind beneath its wings, it is a gift beyond words. A gift that we must cherish, Rickard added, his gaze sweeping over the children. And a power that we must wield with wisdom and responsibility. The children continued to chatter, their stories intertwining, their laughter echoing around the campfire. The dragons had captured their hearts and their imaginations, forging a bond that would undoubtedly shape their future. As the night deepened, and the children, their hearts full of dragon-riding dreams, were finally ushered into their tents, the adults remained by the fire. The flames danced and crackled, casting flickering shadows on their faces, illuminating the serious expressions that had settled upon them. The weight of their discovery, the implications of the ice dragons, hung heavy in the air. Theon, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames, broke the silence. We cannot stay here, he stated, his voice low but firm. This island is too far from our lands. We need to find a place where the dragons can remain hidden, safe, until the time comes for them to reveal themselves to the world. Janos nodded in agreement. Long Lake, he suggested, his voice a quiet hum. It is vast, remote, and surrounded by dense forests. It would offer both concealment and a source of water for the dragons. Long Lake, Theon mused, considering the idea. It is a good choice. But it is still within the north. Even whispers of such creatures in our own lands could reach the ears of the south. Rickard Stark, his brow furrowed with concern, spoke up. That is my worry as well. If rumors begin to spread, if even a hint of the dragon's presence reaches King's Landing, the south will become suspicious. They will start asking questions, sending envoys, perhaps even launching their own investigations into the matter. Diana, ever practical, added her thoughts. And if they were to discover the truth, the consequences could be dire. The South has always feared the power of dragons. They would see this as a threat, a reason to move against us. Lena, her calm presence a steadying force, offered a solution. Wards, she suggested, ancient wards, woven into the land itself, to conceal their presence. Yes, Theon said, his eyes gleaming with a newfound resolve. Wards, we will use the old magic. I will begin the work myself, as soon as we return. We will weave a web of concealment around Long Lake, so potent that no one will stumble upon the dragons, and no hint of their existence will escape. Janos nodded, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. It is a formidable task, brother, but a necessary one. We will help you, in any way we can. And the dragons? Lyra asked, her voice filled with concern. They need to fly, to stretch their wings. How can we keep them confined to Long Lake? They will not be confined, Theon assured her. They can fly at night, under the cover of darkness. The stars will be their only witnesses. And with the wards in place, even their shadows will be hidden from prying eyes. The adults continued to discuss the plan, weighing the risks and the potential rewards. They spoke of the need for secrecy, the importance of patience, and the daunting task that lay ahead. The future of the North, and perhaps even the fate of Westeros, seemed to rest upon their shoulders. Theon, having outlined the plan for concealing the dragons, shifted his gaze towards the fire, a different kind of excitement flickering in his eyes. There is something else I wish to discuss, he began, his voice taking on a more enthusiastic tone. A project I have been developing in my mind, one that I believe could reshape the future of the North. His family turned their attention to him, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and anticipation. And what is this project, Theon? Diana asked, her voice filled with a gentle encouragement. A university, Theon declared, the word hanging in the crisp night air. A place of learning, here in the North, where the sons and daughters of our noble houses, and even talented individuals from the small folk, can receive a comprehensive education. Rickard raised an eyebrow, a hint of skepticism in his voice. A university. We have always relied on the maesters from the citadel for our scholarly needs. What need have we of another place of learning? The need for autonomy, for self-sufficiency, Theon countered, his voice passionate. The need to shape our own education, to instill in our children the values and skills that are most relevant to the North. We cannot forever rely on the South for knowledge. And what manner of education would this university provide? Lyra asked, her curiosity piqued. A broad one, Theon explained. Etiquette and diplomacy, for those who will one day rule. Health and healing, to ensure the well-being of our people. Mathematics and history, to understand the world around us and the lessons of the past. And, of course, he added, his gaze sweeping over his family, training in all forms of combat, with every weapon imaginable. Our lords and ladies, and our most talented commoners, must be both learned and skilled in battle, ready to defend the North against any threat. And you would allow the small folk to attend as well? Lena asked, her expression thoughtful. If they demonstrate exceptional ability, Theon confirmed. There is untapped potential among the common people, brilliant minds and skilled warriors who could serve the North with distinction if given the opportunity. This university could be a beacon of hope, a path for them to rise above their birth and serve our people. It is an ambitious plan, Janos observed, his tone a mixture of caution and admiration. And a costly one, but I see the merit in it. A well-rounded education for our nobility, and the opportunity for the talented among the small folk, would undoubtedly strengthen the North. And where would such a university be built? Rickard inquired. Just outside Wintertown, Theon replied. There is ample land there, and it would be close enough to Winterfell to benefit from its protection and resources, yet far enough to allow for growth and expansion. Theon's voice grew more animated as he described his plans. We will begin construction within the next 3 moons, he declared, his eyes gleaming with determination. It will be a grand undertaking, but I believe we can have the main structures completed within 5 years. Then, we will open the doors and begin to shape the minds of the future. And who will teach at this university? Diana asked, her brow furrowed slightly. Where will you find scholars of such caliber in the North? We will draw them from all over the world, Theon replied, his gaze sweeping over his family. The Citadel, of course, but also from beyond Westeros. I will seek out the finest minds in every field, mathematics, philosophy, history, healing, swordsmanship, archery, even dragonlore, and bring them here to share their knowledge. It will be a melting pot of cultures and ideas, Theon continued, a place where the wisdom of the world converges. And it will be a beacon of light in the North, a testament to our strength, our ambition, and our commitment to knowledge. He paused, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. It will not be easy, he admitted. There will be challenges, obstacles to overcome. But I am confident that, with our combined efforts, we can make this vision a reality. We can build a university that will stand for centuries, a legacy for generations to come.